The deal was dead. 12 interpreters couldn't save it. $300 million was walking out the door. And nobody noticed the janitor mopping the floor in the back corner. Nobody noticed that he understood every word spoken in 4 different languages. Nobody noticed that he could see exactly where everything had gone wrong. Ethan Cross was 32 years old, a widower, a father, and completely invisible to every powerful person in that room. He had spent 3 years making sure of it, but sometimes, no matter how hard a man tries to disappear, life finds him anyway. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Stay with me until the very end. You won't regret it. The fluorescent lights in conference room A had been flickering for 11 days. Ethan knew this because he was the one who'd put in the maintenance request. Twice. He'd filled out the form, signed his name in the employee number box 4471, and slid it under the facilities manager's door on a Tuesday night when the building was mostly empty. Nothing had happened. The lights kept flickering, slow and irregular, like a pulse that couldn't decide whether to keep going. He thought about that sometimes, pushing his cart down the 43rd floor hallway at 11:15 on a Wednesday night. The things that got ignored in a building like this. The requests that disappeared into someone's pile and never came back out. He'd learned not to take it personally. It wasn't personal. He was employee 4471. The request was Form 7B. Things either got done or they didn't, and whether Ethan Cross was the one who filed the paperwork made no difference to anyone. He liked it that way. The cartwheels needed oil. They made a low, consistent squeak against the polished marble floor, and he'd gotten used to timing his steps around it. 1, 2, squeak. 1, 2, squeak. So the sound became something almost rhythmic, almost intentional. He'd worked the night shift at Hartwell International for 2 years and 7 months, and in that time he had learned the building the way you learn a language. Slowly, then completely. He knew which bathroom on the 38th floor had the slow drain. He knew the elevator in the east wing ran about 4 seconds slower than the one in the west. He knew that the partners on the 41st floor ordered Thai food on Thursdays and left the containers on top of the recycling bins instead of inside them, and that the administrative assistant named Patricia, who sat near the window on 40, always left a small chocolate on her desk at the end of the day. Not for herself, but because she knew he came through after hours, and she was that kind of person. He knew the building. The building did not know him. That was the arrangement, and it suited him fine. The 43rd floor was the executive level. Corner offices, a private kitchen, a conference room that could seat 30, and had a built-in video wall that cost more than Ethan's former annual salary at the university. He didn't think about that comparison often. When it surfaced, he pushed it down the way you push a cork back into a bottle. Firm, quick, don't let it breathe. Tonight was different, though. Tonight the 43rd floor was still occupied. He could hear them before he reached the hallway intersection. Voices, multiple, overlapping. The particular kind of noise that wasn't conversation so much as collision. People talking over each other in the way that happened when a room had too many competing languages and not enough shared vocabulary. He paused at the corner, cart handle in both hands, and listened for a moment. Japanese, Mandarin, German, English threading through all of it, the common denominator that wasn't quite working as a common denominator. And underneath those, Korean, unless he was wrong, which he rarely was about this particular thing. He rounded the corner slowly. The glass wall of conference room A gave him a clear view of the situation inside. The long table was full, 15, maybe 18 people, dressed the way people dressed when they were trying to make an impression. Dark suits, careful accessories, the body language of individuals who understood that every gesture carried weight. On one side of the table, a cluster of men in charcoal and navy who carried themselves with the particular upright formality of certain senior Japanese executives. Across from them, 2 Chinese businessmen flanked by assistants, a German delegation of 3 near the window, and at the far end, a pair of Koreans who had clearly been quiet for the last several minutes in the deliberate way that meant they were either deeply patient or deeply finished. At the center of it all, standing at the head of the table with the expression of a person who had been holding the same tense half-smile for so long it had stopped being a smile, was a woman Ethan recognized without knowing personally. Sophia Hartwell. He'd seen her in the building before. Early mornings, sometimes, when she came in before most of the day staff arrived and the lobby was still half dark. He'd seen her in elevators, in hallways, Once in the parking garage when he was coming off shift and she was arriving. She had the kind of face that was difficult to read on first impression. Arranged, carefully composed, the way executives learn to hold their expressions when the stakes were high. She was 30, maybe 31. She ran a company with operations in 17 countries. He knew this because he read. He had always read everything, obsessively, compulsively. Newspapers left on conference tables, industry reports someone had printed and forgotten, the occasional open laptop screen when he was cleaning and no one was there to see him pause. He was not supposed to be interested in the people who worked here. He was not supposed to be interested in anything beyond the work. He pulled his cart to the section of hallway nearest the conference room and began cleaning the floor near the glass wall, slowly. Not eavesdropping, he told himself that, just working. Inside, the interpreter, a man in his late 40s who'd been on his feet for what looked like several hours based on the state of his jacket, was attempting to translate something one of the Japanese executives had said, and it was going badly. Ethan could tell not from the words, but from the faces. The Japanese executive's expression had shifted from polite engagement to something cooler, more closed. Across the table, the senior Chinese businessman was leaning slightly back in his chair in a way that communicated retreat without any movement at all. The interpreter tried again. The Japanese executive shook his head, very slightly, very deliberately. One of the other interpreters, there were 3 positioned around the room, Ethan now realized, leaned in to consult with the primary, and the whispered exchange between them had the panicked quality of people who know they are failing publicly and cannot stop the slide. Ethan set his mop aside. He understood the problem. He had understood it about 45 seconds into listening. The interpreter was translating the words correctly. That was what made it worse. The vocabulary was accurate. The grammar was fine. What was being lost, what had apparently been getting lost for however long this meeting had been going on, was the space between the words. The layer of meaning that lived underneath the literal translation and gave it its actual weight. The Japanese executive had used a phrase that translated, if you were being literal, to something like, this arrangement requires careful consideration of the foundation. The interpreter had rendered it into English as, we need to think more carefully about the basic terms. Which wasn't wrong exactly, except that in context, given the specific construction used, the particular register, the relationship dynamic that the phrasing implied, the executive hadn't been asking for more time to deliberate. He had been signaling, in the way his professional culture signaled things that couldn't be said directly, that something had already been decided, that the foundation, meaning the structure of trust and relationship upon which any real negotiation could be built, had been damaged somewhere along the way, and that without repairing it first, the rest of the conversation was theater. The interpreter had translated a warning as a schedule request. Ethan stood there for 6 seconds. He counted them. He was aware, in a distant and almost clinical way, that what he was about to consider doing was not something he should be considering. He cleaned floors. He was employee 4471. He had built his life very carefully around the principle of not being noticed, not being consulted, not being asked to demonstrate anything to anyone, ever. Lily had told him, 3 weeks ago, in the back seat of the car on the way home from her school's spring performance, that she worried about him being lonely. She was 6 years old. He'd laughed, which was the wrong response. She'd looked at him with her mother's eyes, that specific dark, patient gaze that Dana had used when she was waiting for him to stop pretending something was fine, and said, "You don't do things anymore, Dad. You used to do things." He hadn't had an answer for that. He pushed open the conference room door. The conversation inside stopped. All of it. 18 people turned and looked at a man in a gray maintenance uniform holding a mop handle, standing in the doorway of a room where he had absolutely no reason to be. "I'm sorry to interrupt." He said it in English first, calmly, because calm was the only thing that might keep him from being immediately removed. "My name is Ethan Cross. I work nights in this building. I was cleaning the hallway." He paused. "I think there may be a translation issue that's creating a misunderstanding." The silence in the room was the specific kind that preceded either an expulsion or an opportunity. Sophia Hartwell looked at him. Her expression hadn't changed, that same carefully arranged composure. But her eyes had shifted. Something in them had sharpened. "The hallway," she said, "is out there." "Yes," he agreed. "I'm aware of that." One of the men near the door, a vice president of some kind based on the way he was positioning himself, took a step forward. "I'll call security." Wait! It was Sophia. She hadn't moved, but the single word carried enough weight that the VP stopped. She was still looking at Ethan. What translation issue? He should have left it there. He should have said, never mind, backed out. Let them have their disaster. He had thought about this many times since. In the days that followed, lying awake in the dark at 2 a.m. while Lily slept down the hall. The version of events where he walked back out. The version where nobody's life changed. The executive on the left, Ethan said, nodding slightly toward the Japanese delegation without pointing, because pointing was rude and he was not going to be rude, used a phrase about 10 minutes ago that I believe was translated as a request for more deliberation time. It wasn't. It was a statement about relational standing. He was indicating that something earlier in the discussion created a trust deficit that hasn't been addressed. In Japanese corporate communication, particularly in this context, this level of seniority, that kind of signal means the conversation needs to be restructured before it can go forward. Not extended. Restructured. Nobody moved. The Japanese executive, the one Ethan had identified, turned his head slowly and looked at him with an expression that was measuring and entirely unreadable. Ethan continued because he had started now and stopping halfway was worse. I also think there's a secondary issue on the Chinese side. When your team referenced the timeline in the second phase of the proposal, the phrasing used in the English version suggested flexibility. In the Mandarin, it came through more as an implicit guarantee. Those two things are not the same, and the gap between them is probably why there's tension on that side of the table that doesn't have an obvious source. He stopped. The room was still completely silent. Sophia Hartwell said, in a measured voice that gave away nothing, "How do you know this?" "I speak the languages," Ethan said, "all of them in this room." The interpreter who'd been struggling, the primary, turned and looked at Ethan with an expression that was a complicated mixture of professional humiliation and desperate relief. Sophia looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled out the chair to her right, a senior executive's chair, not a visitor's chair, and said, "Sit down." "I'm a janitor," Ethan said, not as a protest, just as a fact. "I know what you are," she said. "Sit down anyway." He sat down. What happened in the next 2 hours was something that Ethan could never fully reconstruct afterward into a clean narrative, because it didn't happen that way. It happened in fragments, in the rapid-fire way that genuine problem-solving happened when the stakes were real and the time was short. He moved through the table's communication failures the way you might move through a house after a storm, identifying damage, making immediate fixes, explaining as he went. He addressed the Japanese delegation directly, in Japanese, with an apology that was framed in the specific register of professional discourse that acknowledged misstep without assigning blame, because blame had no place here, and everyone in the room knew it. He watched the senior executive's face. Something in it shifted, not dramatically, not a sudden thaw into warmth, but a subtle recalibration, an acknowledgement. The executive replied, and Ethan translated what he'd said for Sophia without stripping the subtext out of it. He's saying the framework has merit. The foundation isn't damaged, it was obscured. He's willing to continue. Then he turned to the Chinese delegation and addressed the timeline misunderstanding. He did it carefully, without making anyone look careless, framing it as the kind of gap that emerged naturally when two parties came to an agreement table with strong assumptions about how their language worked, which was true. The senior businessman, a man named Liu Wei, according to the placard in front of him, though his expression had been close enough for Ethan to read without it, considered this for a moment and then asked a direct question in Mandarin. He wants to know if the flexibility in the timeline is genuine or structural, Ethan told Sophia quietly. Whether it can actually accommodate what his organization needs, or whether it's language that creates the impression of flexibility, while the dates are, in practice, fixed. Sophia said, "Tell him the flexibility is genuine in the second phase. The third phase has hard stops because of regulatory requirements in 2 markets, but the second phase has a window." Ethan translated this. Liu Wei looked at Sophia, then looked at Ethan, then nodded once. The German delegation, it turned out, had a much simpler issue, a contractual term that had been rendered slightly differently in 2 versions of the document that nobody had caught, and Ethan handled that in 5 minutes with the kind of precision that came from years of academic work in international legal language, the domain where a single word in the wrong register could invalidate an entire clause. By 1 a.m, the meeting had not just recovered. It had closed. Not completely. There were still details to formalize, documents to review, A second meeting to be scheduled for the formal signing. But the deal was alive when it should have been dead, and every person in the room knew why. The delegations filed out. There was a certain graciousness in how the Japanese executive paused near Ethan on the way past. Not a handshake, nothing so direct, but a pause and a slight acknowledgement that meant something specific. Ethan returned it in kind. The last of the delegates left. The interpreters packed their materials in a silence that was densely uncomfortable. The primary, the man who'd been struggling, passed Ethan on the way out and stopped. He was older, heavy-set, with the kind of face that showed its feelings whether it wanted to or not. "That thing you said about the relational standing," he said. "I've been doing this for 22 years. The phrase was obscure, Ethan said. Regional variation, specific to certain industries. It wasn't obvious." The man looked at him for a moment. "You were kinder about it than you had to be." "I wasn't trying to be kind," Ethan said. "I was trying to fix the problem." The interpreter nodded and left. Ethan became aware that Sophia Hartwell was still in the room. She hadn't moved from her position at the head of the table. Her jacket was off. She'd taken it off an hour into the session, and she was leaning against the table now, arms crossed, looking at him with an expression that had moved past composure into something more openly interested. He stood up from the chair where he'd been sitting for 2 hours and became suddenly acutely aware that he was wearing a gray maintenance uniform with his employee number on the chest pocket. "Thank you," she said. It was straightforward, unornamented, the kind of thank you that wasn't performing gratitude. That was just registering a fact. "You're welcome," he said. "How many languages?" He considered lying. He wasn't sure why. Fluent in 7, functional in 4 more. Her expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it moved. "And you work nights here?" "Yes." "Since when?" "Almost 3 years." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have to ask, and I realize this is an unusual question given the circumstances. Why?" Ethan looked at the conference table. The water glasses were still out. The remains of a working dinner that nobody had eaten during the last 2 hours. He would have to clean this room when she left. He was aware of the precise strangeness of that fact. "Personal reasons," he said. She didn't push it. He'd expected her to. People in her position usually pushed because they were used to questions being answered. But she didn't. She just nodded, once, as if personal reasons was a category of answer she respected. "I'd like to talk further," she said. "Not now. It's past midnight, and I think we've both had enough for one evening. But I'd like to know more about your background." She paused. "If you're open to that." "You don't know anything about me," Ethan said. "Not as a challenge, just as a fact." "No," she agreed. "That's the point." She gathered her jacket from the back of her chair and her portfolio from the table and moved toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped and turned back, and for the first time since he'd entered the room, her expression allowed something in it that was almost wry. "The lights in here have been flickering for almost 2 weeks," she said. "I put in 2 maintenance requests," Ethan said. "I'll make sure it gets addressed," she said. And then she was gone, her heels precise and even against the marble hallway, and he was alone in conference room A with a room that needed cleaning and 2 hours left on his shift. But he cleaned the room. He did it the same way he always did, methodically, without hurrying, moving through the space systematically so that nothing got missed and nothing got done twice. He stacked the water glasses. He straightened the chairs. He collected the dinner debris and broke down the printed materials that had been left on the table, the ones that were clearly destined for recycling rather than shredding, and set them in the appropriate bin. He didn't think about what had just happened, or he tried not to. The trying was more effort than the not thinking would have been 3 years ago. His phone buzzed at 12:40 with a message from Mrs. Okafor next door, who watched Lily on nights when he worked. The message just said, "She's fine, sleeping, don't worry," which meant Mrs. Okafor had noticed that he sometimes checked his phone with the particular frequency of a parent who had reasons for anxiety, and had taken to sending preemptive reassurances. He appreciated that more than he'd ever managed to say. Lily was fine. She was sleeping. He pocketed the phone and finished the room. Okay. There was a photo on the lanyard attached to his building access card. Not a required thing. The ID badge had his face on it. The lanyard was just a lanyard. But there was a small plastic sleeve where some people put photos, and Ethan had a photo in his, a wallet-sized print of a woman laughing, caught mid-laugh in a way that had nothing performative in it. Her head slightly turned so the light caught her face at an angle that seemed unrepeatable. Dana at 27, Dana 6 months before the diagnosis. He looked at it sometimes. Not sentimentally, or not only sentimentally, more like keeping a bearing, like the way sailors had used fixed stars before the instruments existed. You looked at the fixed point to know where you were. He was on the 38th floor now, moving through the second half of his rounds, and the building had settled into the deep quiet that came after 1 in the morning. The specific silence of a structure that was still technically occupied but in which all the human activity had wound down. The HVAC cycling through its nighttime rhythms, the elevators waiting at their floors without being called. He thought about the Japanese executive's face when the misunderstanding had been cleared. That particular expression, not gratitude, not relief, something more reserved than either, that communicated acknowledgement. I see that you understood what was actually being said. It was the most direct form of respect available in that particular professional context, and it was reserved for situations where it was genuinely earned. Ethan had not felt that in a while. He hadn't felt much of the professional world at all, deliberately, in a while. He had structured his life around its absence. The night shift at a building where he was anonymous, the pickup line at Lily's school where the other parents made small talk he participated in minimally, the apartment where they had their routines, dinner, homework, the hour before bed that was theirs without interruption. A life built for two. A life in which a third person's continuing absence was the organizing fact. He hadn't chosen the janitor job because it was beneath him, or because it required no thought. He had chosen it because it required exactly the right amount of thought, enough to keep him functional, not enough to keep him awake. There was a difference between surviving and hiding that he had understood, in the abstract, since about the 18th month after Dana died. The understanding hadn't translated into behavior change. Knowing a thing and doing a thing were not the same as each other, and Lily's observation from the back seat 3 weeks ago had been accurate in the specific way that children's observations were sometimes accurate, without the comfort of context or the softening of tact. You used to do things, Dad. He pushed the cart around the corner and began the corridor that led to the service elevator. He thought about 7 languages. 11, if you counted functional. He thought about a $300 million deal in a room where 18 professionals had been talking past each other for, he estimated, at least 2 hours before he arrived. He thought about Sophia Hartwell saying, "I'd like to know more about your background," with the directness of someone who was used to gathering information and acting on it, and the follow-up thought that she would, in fact, do exactly that. He thought about Dana. He thought about Lily saying, "You don't do things anymore." The service elevator doors opened, and he pushed the cart inside and turned around and watched the 43rd floor hallway disappear behind the closing doors. The next morning, Lily had 2 questions before breakfast. The first was whether hedgehogs could swim, which led to a longer conversation than Ethan had expected because the answer turned out to be more nuanced than a simple yes or no. And Lily received nuance with the same focused attention she gave everything, which was one of the things about her that still sometimes stopped him mid-sentence. The second question, delivered while he was making eggs, was, "Did something happen last night?" He looked at her. She was 6 years old and already eating her toast with the systematic corner-to-corner method she'd developed on her own at age 4. She didn't look up from the toast when she asked. "Why do you ask that?" he said. "Because you look like you're thinking about something," she said. "Not your regular thinking, different thinking." He turned back to the eggs. "I helped some people with something at work." "What kind of people?" "Business people. They were having a meeting and there was a misunderstanding and I helped sort it out." "What kind of misunderstanding?" "Language," he said. "Different languages, different ways of saying things." Lily considered this. "Like how Mrs. Okafor says, 'How now?' when she means, 'How are you?'" "A little bit like that," he said. "More complicated, but the same basic idea." "Are they going to fix it now?" "I think so." She finished the corner of her toast. "Good," she said, with the decisiveness of someone for whom the problem was now resolved and they were ready to move on. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "If you speak all those languages, why are you cleaning offices?" He stood very still for a moment with the spatula in his hand. "It's a good job," he said. "It pays okay. The hours work with your school schedule." Lily looked at him with her mother's eyes. He put the eggs on the plates. "Eat your breakfast," he said. He was called into the facilities manager's office that afternoon. He had been expecting this. You didn't walk into a major corporate negotiation in a maintenance uniform and sit down at the executive table and translate for 2 hours and then walk back to your cart without consequences. He had known that walking through the door. He had done it anyway. Frank Kelleher, the facilities manager, was a practical man in his mid-50s who had worked in building operations for 30 years and who managed the night shift staff with the particular combination of reasonable expectations and minimal engagement that defined a certain style of decent management. He was not unkind. He was also clearly uncomfortable. "Sit down, Ethan." Ethan sat. Frank's desk had a small framed photo: wife, 3 kids, a dog of some kind, and a coffee mug from a minor league baseball team. He was looking at his computer screen rather than at Ethan, which was the posture of someone who was preparing to say something they hadn't entirely decided how to say. "I got a call this morning," Frank said. Ethan waited. "From the 43rd floor. Frank glanced at him. "You want to tell me what happened up there last night?" "There was a meeting still going on when I started my rounds," Ethan said. "A translation problem that was going to kill a major deal. I offered to help." Frank looked at him for a long moment. "You offered?" "Yes." "You walked into an executive-level international negotiation?" "Yes." "In your uniform?" "I was aware of the uniform, yes." Frank rubbed the back of his neck. "Ethan, I've been in facilities management for 30 years. I have never—" He stopped, started again. "I got a call from Sophia Hartwell's personal assistant this morning. Not from HR, not from legal. From her office directly." He turned his computer screen so Ethan could see it. "She put in a request to have you transferred to a temporary assignment status pending a meeting with her, which means, as of right now, you're not on my schedule." Ethan looked at the screen. "She can do that?" he said. "She owns the building," Frank said. "She can do most things." There was a pause. "Are you firing me?" Ethan asked. Frank made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. No, she was very specific that you were not to be—" Her word was penalized. He shook his head. "I have to be honest with you. I've managed a lot of people. I've never had someone leave my team because the CEO wanted a meeting. I don't know what to tell you." "I don't know what to tell you either," Ethan said. Frank leaned back in his chair. After a moment, he said, 7 languages. 11, Ethan said. "If you count the ones I'm not fully fluent in." Frank looked at him with an expression that was, Ethan thought, mostly genuine bewilderment and perhaps a small amount of something like injured pride. Not the pride of a man whose authority had been challenged, but the pride of a man who had spent 2 years managing someone and apparently hadn't known the first thing about them. "You could have mentioned," Frank said. "It wasn't relevant," Ethan said. "To the work." "The work," Frank repeated. And then, after a moment, "Your work was excellent, for what it's worth. Your reports were always filed on time. The floors on 38 and 39 consistently scored highest in the quarterly building inspections." He paused. "I don't know why I'm telling you that." "Because you're a thorough person," Ethan said. "It comes across." Frank nodded slowly, stood up, extended his hand. "Good luck," he said. "I mean that." Ethan shook his hand. The meeting with Sophia Hartwell was scheduled for the following Thursday. In the 6 days between, Ethan maintained his existing routine as much as possible, because routine was the architecture of a life, and he had learned not to dismantle architecture in advance of an outcome you couldn't yet see. He dropped Lily off. He slept. He picked Lily up. He made dinner. He did the homework review, which had expanded since she'd started first grade to include a 20-minute reading period that Ethan had introduced without calling it educational, just reading before bed, which she had accepted as a natural feature of evenings. He did not think during this time about what Thursday might bring. Or he tried. The trying was its own admission. Lily asked him on Sunday whether the business people were okay. "I think so," he said. "Did they say thank you?" He thought about Sophia Hartwell's face in the conference room at 1 in the morning, the clean, unornamented thank you that wasn't performing anything. "Yes," he said. "They did." "That's good," Lily said. "When someone helps you, you should say thank you." "You're right," he said. She looked at him. "You look different." "Different how?" She thought about this with the focused seriousness she brought to questions that required genuine consideration. Like you're paying attention to something, she finally said. He didn't have an answer for that. He pulled her into a hug instead, which she tolerated for approximately 4 seconds before wiggling free to go find her book, and held the moment for those 4 seconds like something with weight. Thursday arrived with the specific quality of days that mark something before you know what they're marking. He wore the only jacket he owned that was appropriate for an executive floor meeting, a dark navy blazer he hadn't worn in 3 years, which still fit because he'd worked outdoors and hauled equipment, and the physical demands of the night shift had kept him lean in the way that hard work did, not the way gyms did. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a moment before he left and thought that he looked like a man who used to be someone else, which was, he supposed, approximately accurate. The 43rd floor looked different in the daytime. He had spent 2 years and 7 months on this floor between 11 at night and 6 in the morning, and he knew every inch of it in the specific intimacy of the dark hours. In daylight, with the administrative staff at their desks, and the natural light coming through the full-length windows and the particular energy of a functioning executive operation, it was different. Not unfamiliar. Just seen from a different angle. Sophia's assistant, a young man named Marcus, who had the efficient but warm professionalism of someone who was genuinely good at his job, met him in the lobby, offered coffee, and walked him to a smaller conference room adjacent to Sophia's main office. Not conference room A. A different one. No flickering lights. A round table instead of a long one. She was already there when he came in. "Ethan," she said, "thank you for coming." "Of course," he said. She looked different in this context, too. The same composed quality, but without the high-stakes pressure of the negotiation, there was something underneath it that was more visible. She looked like someone who was tired in the particular way of people who carried significant responsibility and did so largely alone. She gestured toward the coffee service on the side table and waited while he poured a cup. Then she sat down across from him. "I want to understand," she said, "who you actually are." It was the kind of opening that didn't come with softening preamble, and he found he respected that. "That's a broad question," he said. "I know," she said. "Start wherever you want." He looked at the table for a moment. "I was a professor," he said. "International communication with a focus on cross-cultural linguistic pragmatics. That's the academic name for what you saw me do on Wednesday night. The study of how language functions differently across cultures, how meaning is created not just by words but by context, relationship, hierarchy, register. I taught at a university here for 7 years. Before that, I did field work in 4 countries. He paused. "I resigned 3 years ago." "Why?" "My wife died," he said. "Cancer. It moved fast. 3 months from diagnosis to end." He kept his voice even. He had learned to keep his voice even for this part, not because it didn't affect him, but because falling apart in other people's presence was the thing he didn't do. "We had a daughter, Lily. She was 3. I left academia to be home, and then I just stayed out. The night shift job was available. The hours worked." Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry. For your wife." "Thank you," he said. The sympathy wasn't performed. It was just registered in the same direct way she'd thanked him after the meeting. "You clearly didn't lose any of it," she said. "Your ability." "No," he said. "It doesn't leave. I tried, not consciously trying, but effectively, to put it somewhere I didn't have to use it. It doesn't leave." "I know what that's like," she said, not elaborating, just stating it. He looked at her. "What I want to offer you," she said, "is a position. Senior Director of International Communications. Your own team. Scope of responsibility over all of our cross-cultural negotiations, partnership development communications, and regional office liaison work." She slid a folder across the table. "The compensation package is in there. The role description. I want to be transparent. I'm not offering you this because of Wednesday night alone. I asked HR to pull everything I could find on your academic work after you left the building. I read your doctoral research, 3 of your published papers." She paused. "You were doing genuinely significant work." "It was a long time ago," he said. 3 years isn't a long time ago," she said. "You're 32. 3 years ago, you were at the height of your career." He looked at the folder, didn't open it. "I have a daughter," he said. "The night shift worked because of the hours. If I take something like this, the role is structured with flexibility. she said. That was deliberate. I want the best person for the work. Making the schedule incompatible with your life would defeat the purpose. He looked at her. Why are you doing this? He said. Because you saved $300 million of company value on a Wednesday night, she said, while cleaning the floors. And because people who are capable of things should be doing those things. She paused. That's the honest answer. And the other honest answer? She held his gaze. I don't know you. I don't know why you walked away from what you were. But I know what it looks like when someone capable has made themselves small, and I know what it costs. I've done it myself. A beat. You don't have to answer today. Take the folder. Think about it. He picked up the folder. He thought about Lily in the back seat saying, you used to do things. He thought about the Japanese executive's face when the misunderstanding was cleared. That acknowledgement. He thought about 7 languages. 11, if you counted functional. 3 years carrying them around without using them, the same way you might carry a set of tools in the trunk of your car for so long that you forgot they were there. I'll think about it, he said. He took the folder home and put it on the kitchen table and made dinner and didn't open it until Lily was in bed. Then he sat down and read every page. And in the silence of the apartment, with Lily sleeping down the hall and the city making its nighttime sounds outside the window, Ethan Cross, former professor, widower, night shift janitor, man who spoke 11 languages and had spent 3 years making himself invisible, read the description of a life he had abandoned. And for the first time in a long time, he did not immediately push it down. He left it there, let it breathe. The folder stayed on the kitchen table for 4 days. Ethan didn't hide it. He didn't move it to a drawer or turn it face down the way people sometimes did with things they weren't ready to look at. He left it exactly where he'd put it after reading it that first night, slightly off-center, next to the fruit bowl, where it sat through breakfast and dinner and the morning rush and the evening routine like a guest who had arrived without being formally invited and was waiting with considerable patience to be acknowledged. Lily noticed it on the second day. She walked around the table twice during breakfast on Saturday morning, in the circling way she approached things that interested her without wanting to appear too interested. And then on the third pass, she stopped and looked at it directly. "What's that?" she said. "Work stuff," Ethan said. "What kind of work stuff?" "A job offer." She sat down with her cereal and considered this. A different job? Maybe. Better or worse? Different, he said. More what I used to do. Before. Lily was quiet for a moment, eating. Then, is it scary? He looked at her. Why would it be scary? Because you get a weird face when you look at it, she said. Not cruel, just observational. Like when I had to do the multiplication presentation and I kept practicing, but I still didn't want to go up. He had no immediate response to being compared accurately to a 6-year-old before a school presentation. I'll think about it, he said. You said that already, Lily said. That was 4 days ago. He stared at her. She looked back at him with the patient, slightly puzzled expression of someone who couldn't understand why thinking about something for 4 days was different from just deciding. Net. He called his former department head on Sunday afternoon. Professor Leonard Marsh had been Ethan's academic mentor before he was his colleague, and then his colleague for 6 years, and then, in the year after Dana died, one of approximately 3 people who had called consistently enough and with enough genuine persistence to qualify as someone who had actually tried. Ethan had not made it easy. He'd answered maybe a third of those calls, and even on the ones he answered, he'd been present in only the technical sense of having a voice on the line. Leonard picked up on the second ring, which meant he was at his desk, which he almost always was on Sunday afternoons. Ethan. No preamble. No how are you or it's been a while. Just his name, with the warmth of someone who treated familiarity as its own kind of welcome. Hey, Ethan said. You're calling, Leonard said. That's new. I know. He paused. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. If someone hadn't practiced something for 3 years, something they were good at, would they still be good at it? There was a short silence on the other end that wasn't confusion, but consideration. Depends on the skill, Leonard said. Depends on the person. Depends on whether they'd been carrying it around without using it, or whether they'd actually put it down somewhere. Another pause. Language doesn't go. You know that. It lives in a different part of the brain than most things. You don't lose it the way you lose, say, the muscle memory for a sport. I know that. You're asking something else, Leonard said. Ethan was quiet. You're asking whether you'd still be any good at the work, Leonard said. The teaching, the application, the full contact version of what you did. Not whether the languages are still there, whether you're still there. He didn't answer immediately. I don't know, he finally said. I haven't been that person in 3 years. You haven't been a lot of people in 3 years, Leonard said, not unkindly. You've been a father, which is not nothing. But yes, you've been fairly thoroughly absent from everything else. A beat. What happened? Ethan told him about the meeting, the shortened version, the conference room, the delegations, the misunderstanding, the 2 hours at the table. Leonard listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Ethan had always respected about him. When Ethan finished, there was a brief silence. You caught a second-order pragmatic misalignment in real time, Leonard said, in a high-stakes live negotiation, with no preparation. His voice had shifted into the register it took on when he was genuinely engaged with something intellectually. And then you addressed it without assigning blame, preserved the relational standing of all parties, and closed the deal. I helped close it, Ethan said. It was Sophia Hartwell's deal. Don't minimize, Leonard said sharply but not harshly. That's a bad habit you've developed. Ethan was quiet. Take the job, Leonard said. It's not that simple. Why not? Because I have a daughter and a life I've built, and stepping back into... He stopped. The words had come out with more edge than he intended, and he recognized the edge. It was the edge of the argument he'd been having with himself for 4 days, now audible to another person. Leonard let the silence sit for a moment before he said, Ethan, I know what you lost. I'm not minimizing that. But I watched you spend 3 years treating grief as a destination instead of a passage. You've been parked there. A pause. Lily needs a father who's alive, not just present, alive. The words landed in the specific way that true things sometimes landed. Not comfortably, but completely. I'll think about it, Ethan said. You've been thinking about it, Leonard said. Call me when you decide. He called Sophia Hartwell's office Monday morning and told Marcus he was accepting. There was a pause on the other end, and then Marcus said in a tone that was professionally neutral, but contained what sounded like genuine relief. She'll be very glad to hear that. Can you come in Wednesday to discuss the transition? He came in Wednesday, and then Thursday. And then, with a speed that had the quality of events deciding themselves rather than being decided, his whole life rearranged. The practical things first. He gave Frank Kelleher 2 weeks' notice, which Frank accepted with a handshake and the particular expression of a man who had made peace with something and wasn't going to make a thing of it. He talked to Mrs. Okafor, who adjusted her availability with a warmth that made him feel, briefly, the way you felt when you realized the community around you had been there all along and you'd just been too far inside yourself to register it. He talked to Lily. He did it at dinner on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary Tuesday that didn't announce itself as significant. Pasta, the early spring light still coming through the kitchen window at 6:30, Lily's backpack dropped by the door in her habitual, slightly too far from where it should be spot. I'm going to take the new job, he said. She looked up from her pasta. The one from the folder? Yes. Are you scared? He thought about lying. The reflex was there. The parental instinct toward, of course, not that was more about protecting the child from a father's uncertainty than any genuine reassurance. He didn't follow it. A little, he said. She nodded seriously, as if this was an acceptable answer. I got scared before the multiplication presentation, she said. And then I did it, and it was okay. Was it good? Not really, she said. I forgot the 7 times table for a second, but I figured it out and finished. She looked at him. You'll figure it out. He ate his pasta. Dad, she said. Yeah? Is the lady from the company going to be your boss? Yes, he said. Her name's Sophia. Is she nice? He considered this with actual care, because Lily asked questions that deserved actual care. I think she's serious, he said. I think she's fair. I don't know yet if she's nice. Nice is something you find out later. Lily accepted this. Okay, she said, and went back to her pasta with the finality of someone whose questions had been answered and who was now ready to move on. What nobody told Ethan What he hadn't anticipated, which was embarrassing given that he had spent years studying the ways human beings communicated and miscommunicated, was how loud it would be. Not literally loud. Hartwell International was a professionally functioning environment with appropriate office acoustics and an open-plan layout that had been designed with some actual thought given to noise management. It wasn't loud, it was just full of people and their dynamics, their histories with each other, their established hierarchies and informal power structures, and all the accumulated social weight of a place where the same people had been working together for years. He had been invisible here for almost 3 years. He knew where the slow drain was and which partners ordered Thai food on Thursdays, and that Patricia left a chocolate on her desk. He had known this place entirely from the outside. Now he was on the inside, and it was a completely different building. His office was on the 42nd floor, one below the executive level, which was, he suspected, an intentional architectural message about his position. Senior enough to be taken seriously, not positioned alongside the people who had been here for 20 years. His team was small. 2 senior communications analysts, an assistant, and a junior specialist who was finishing her master's degree in applied linguistics and had been hired 6 months ago. Their names were Raymond, Claire, Kwame as the assistant, and Yuna, the junior specialist, the linguistics student, who looked at Ethan on his first day with the particular expression of someone encountering a career they'd read about and were trying to reconcile with the person standing in front of them. "I've read your 2019 paper," Yuna said on that first day, with a directness that he appreciated, "on pragmatic failure in multilateral trade negotiations. It needs updating," he said. "The case studies are dated." "The framework holds," she said. "The framework holds," he agreed. "The world it was applied to has moved." She nodded, filing this away. He could see her recalibrating something, her expectation of who he would be perhaps adjusting to the actual person. He was familiar with that process. He was doing it himself, in the opposite direction, with everyone he met. The first 2 weeks were the hardest, not because the work was difficult. The work was the most natural thing he'd touched in 3 years, like picking up a book in a language you'd grown up speaking after years of reading nothing. The frameworks came back, the instincts, the precision of applied linguistic analysis in real-time context. Those things didn't need recovery. They'd been waiting. What was hard was the people. Specifically, the people trying to figure out who he was. He understood the phenomenon, intellectually. He had walked into an executive role at a company where he'd previously been anonymous overnight staff. The professional narrative of that, janitor becomes senior director, was the kind of story that circulated in an organization and gathered interpretations the way a rolling object gathered mass. Some of those interpretations were generous. Some of them weren't. He heard it first from Claire, the senior analyst, who had the kind of blunt candor that came from someone who'd been in a place long enough to have stopped performing diplomacy with her immediate team. "People are talking," she said. It was his 3rd week. They were in the small conference room on 42, reviewing materials for an upcoming regional partnership meeting. "I thought you should know. Not because it'll affect the work, necessarily, but because you're probably going to walk into a room at some point and read the energy wrong if you don't have context." "What are they saying?" he said. "The charitable version is that you're a Hartwell project. CEO saw something raw and is developing it." Claire said this without decoration. "The less charitable version is," she paused, "that it's personal." Ethan looked at her. "Between you and Sophia Hartwell," Claire said. He was quiet for a moment. "That's not accurate." "I know," she said. "I'm telling you what's circulating, not what I believe." She paused. "For what it's worth, the people who've actually worked with you so far, Yuna, Raymond, they're not saying those things, but they're junior. The noise comes from the mid-level." "The mid-level," Ethan repeated. "The people who've been here long enough to have opinions and not long enough to have actual power," Claire said. "The most dangerous demographic in any organization." He thought about this. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "You're good at this work," Claire said. It wasn't flattering. She said it the way you'd say the weather was cold, as a fact that informed other decisions. The kind of good that changes how the company operates. That'll matter more than the gossip eventually. I just wanted to make sure you didn't walk into the next 6 months blind." He nodded. She gathered her materials and stood up. At the door, she paused. "One more thing. Hartwell. Sophia. She's not what people think she is either. The cold CEO thing is real as far as it goes, but it goes about 3 inches deep. She looked at him steadily. She doesn't do things without reasons. There's usually more of a reason than people realize. What's the reason here? Ethan asked. Claire shrugged. You should ask her, she said. She'll tell you. He did not immediately ask her. The first month at Hartwell established patterns that became familiar quickly. The weekly leadership brief on Monday mornings, the cross-departmental communication reviews midweek, the ad hoc calls that appeared on his calendar with the frequency of a company that operated in too many time zones at once. He worked. He worked at the level he'd worked at when he was building his academic career, Hassot, focused, specific, with the discipline that came from having a real problem to solve rather than a performance to give. He saw Sophia regularly. In the context of the company, this was unremarkable. He was her senior director of international communications, she was the CEO, and the nature of his work meant their paths crossed more than most. They were in meetings together 2 or 3 times a week. They had one-on-ones every Friday afternoon, 45 minutes, in the small conference room adjacent to her office. Those Friday meetings were where he came to understand, gradually and through accumulation rather than revelation, that Claire had been right about the 3 inches. Sophia Hartwell was not warm in the conventional sense. She didn't do small talk, not because she was incapable of it, but because she appeared to find it genuinely inefficient. She'd rather get to the point and finish with time left over. She was demanding in ways that were precise enough that you knew exactly what was being demanded and whether you'd delivered it. She made decisions quickly and owned them fully when they were wrong. But underneath the precision, the demanding quality, the relentless forward motion, there were seams. He noticed them the way he noticed everything, which was the way a person noticed things who had spent years paying attention to communication from below the visible register. A long pause before she answered a question about a specific regional partner. Not strategic hesitation, but the kind that came from something personal. The particular set of her jaw when someone on the executive team questioned a decision in the specific patronizing way that some men question some women's decisions. The way she arrived early to meetings and left late and in between managed to be always in motion, always occupied, as if stillness was something to avoid. You're good at this work, he said to her one Friday, after she'd flagged a nuanced issue in a cross-regional proposal before anyone else on the team had caught it. She looked at him with a slight, wary expression, as if praise was a thing she expected to want something from her. Yes, she said carefully. So are you. I meant it as an observation, he said, not a compliment. Something in her expression eased slightly. Most people mean it as the latter. I know, he said. That's why I clarified. She looked at him for a moment, and then she did something he hadn't seen her do in meetings before. She almost smiled. It came and went quickly, more like the shadow of a smile, the trace of the expression without the full commitment. But it was there. You're strange, she said, not unkindly. You're not the first person to say so, he said. Sets. The deal that confirmed his value to the company wasn't spectacular. It didn't have the drama of the Wednesday night rescue. It was, in fact, methodical. A 3-month partnership development process with a South Korean technology firm whose senior leadership communicated in layers of hierarchical subtext that the company's previous contact team had consistently misread as warmth when it was deference, and as agreement when it was careful non-rejection. Ethan built a communication framework for the partnership team. It wasn't a document so much as a field guide, a practical working reference for how to read what was actually being communicated versus what was being literally said. How to respond in ways that acknowledged the hierarchical structure without making the American side appear to be performing deference they didn't feel. He ran 2 training sessions with the partnership team. He sat in on 4 of the early contact calls and gave feedback afterward, specific and without excess diplomacy. The partnership closed in the 2nd month, on terms that the company's original model had estimated would take 18 months to achieve. He got a message from Sophia at 7:30 on the evening the terms were finalized. It said, "Good work. I mean that as a fact, not a compliment." He stared at his phone for a moment. Then he wrote back, "I know, thank you." He set the phone down and looked at the ceiling of his home office, the small room off the kitchen that had been storage when they first moved in, and that he'd cleared out after starting this job, because he needed somewhere to work in the evenings that wasn't the kitchen table. He could hear Lily down the hall. She was talking to her stuffed animals, a running narrative she'd been conducting since she was about 4, her voice carrying the particular rhythm of someone telling a story they were inventing as they went. He sat in the chair that had replaced the storage boxes and let himself register, for a quiet moment, that something had changed, not fixed, not resolved, changed, which was a different thing, a more honest thing. 3 years of a carefully managed smaller life, and now here he was in his own home office at 7:30 on a Tuesday evening with a successful outcome on the screen and his daughter's voice in the next room and the professional part of him that had been in storage apparently clicking back into alignment. It didn't feel triumphant. He'd expected it to feel triumphant, or maybe he'd expected to feel nothing, which was how he'd been anticipating most feelings since Dana died. It felt instead like the specific relief of setting down something heavy that you'd been carrying for so long you'd stopped noticing the weight. It was Raymond who told him about the other thing that was circulating. Raymond was the other senior analyst, careful, measured, the kind of person who processed things thoroughly before speaking, and as a result was worth listening to when he did. He and Ethan had developed the rapport that came from working closely and honestly for several months. The kind where the professional and the personal had a loose, functional border rather than a wall. They were working late. An urgent regional briefing needed to be prepared overnight. And it was past 8 when Raymond put his pen down and looked across the work table with the expression of a person who had been deciding whether to say something. "There's something going around about you," Raymond said. "You probably know." "The relationship theory," Ethan said. "That one's old news," Raymond said. "This is different. Someone, I don't know who, started circulating a version of your background, the academic record, the years you were active. There's a theory building that you gave up a significant career because of some kind of breakdown after your wife died. That you came to Hartwell stable on the surface, but that the job is too much and you're going to fall apart under pressure." Ethan sat with this for a moment. "Who started it?" he said. "I genuinely don't know," Raymond said, "but I know it's reached a few of the senior partners. Someone put it in front of Daniel Crane." He paused. Crane was the executive VP of Business Development, one of the original senior partners, present at the company since before Sophia took over, the kind of institutional figure who represented a certain kind of organizational memory, and who Ethan had noticed watching him in meetings with an assessment that never quite resolved into openness. "What did Crane say?" Ethan said. "I don't know exactly, but the gist of what came back was that he has questions about your stability." Raymond met his eyes. "Which means he has questions about Sophia's judgment in hiring you." Ethan understood the structure of it immediately. The attack wasn't directly on him. It was on her, routed through him. Question whether Ethan belonged here, and you implicitly question whether Sophia's decision was emotional rather than professional, which fed into the other thing circulating. It was, he recognized, professionally tidy. "She knows," he said. "Sophia." Raymond paused. "I don't know. Maybe. She's not the kind of person things hide from for long." Ethan looked at the briefing materials spread out across the table. The overnight deadline. "We should finish this," he said. "Yeah," Raymond said. "We should." He picked up his pen, then stopped again. "For what it's worth, the stability question. I've worked here for 6 years. I've watched a lot of people come into high-pressure roles and handle them different ways. You're one of the most level people I've worked with." He said it the same way Claire had said things, as factual observation rather than reassurance. "Whatever happened 3 years ago, it's not what's in that room when you work." "Thank you," Ethan said. "I'm not trying to be encouraging," Raymond said. "I'm just telling you what I see." "I know," Ethan said. "That's why it means something." They worked through until past 11. The briefing was precise and complete, and Ethan sent it at 11:40 with a cover note to Sophia flagging the 3 points that were likely to require on-the-fly adjustment in the actual meeting. Her response came back at midnight. "Good. Get some sleep." He closed his laptop and sat in the building's late-night quiet and thought about Daniel Crane and the whispers moving through the company's middle floors and the specific patient malice of a professional environment where someone had decided that his presence was a threat that needed addressing. He thought about Dana, briefly. Not the grief, not the absence, but the actual person. The specific and particular fact of who she had been. Dana had been the least interested of anyone he'd ever known in what other people thought of her, in the specific way of someone who had a very clear internal compass and didn't need external navigation. He had loved that about her. He had always been less certain, more attuned to the room, more affected by what the room carried about him. The professional skill and the personal vulnerability pointing in opposite directions. He called Mrs. Okafor to say he was on his way home. "She had a nightmare at 9, Mrs. Okafor said. "I sat with her. She's fine now." "What was it about?" Ethan said. "She didn't say. She wanted her stuffed rabbit and a glass of water, and she was back asleep in 10 minutes. A pause. "She asked me if you were okay. What did you tell her?" "I told her you were working and that working meant you were more than okay." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Mrs. Okafor." "Go home," she said. "She'll want to see you in the morning." The conversation with Sophia happened the following Friday. He arrived for their standing meeting, and she was already at the round table, which was normal, but the file open in front of her was not a communications file. It was a personnel file. His, he realized as he sat down. She looked at him directly. "I need to talk to you about something." "Crane," he said, a brief pause. "You know?" "Raymond told me what he'd heard. I figured the rest." She closed the file. "He came to me 3 days ago with concerns about your fitness for the role. He framed it as a due diligence question, said there were gaps in the background check related to the period after your wife died, that the circumstances of your departure from the university weren't fully characterized." "I left to raise my daughter," Ethan said. "I was not dismissed. I was not asked to leave. I resigned. That is the full characterization." "I know," she said. "I had it verified before I offered you the position." She looked at him steadily. "I'm telling you about Crane's conversation, not because I'm uncertain about you. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what's moving through the organization." "He's questioning your judgment," Ethan said. "He's been questioning my judgment since I was 28 years old, and my father made me CEO," she said. The evenness with which she said this didn't conceal the weight behind it. "That's not new. The route changes, the questioning doesn't." She paused. "What I want to know is whether it affects you, whether it changes anything about how you work or how you feel about being here." He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "It doesn't change the work. It makes the environment harder to move through, but the work is separate from that." He looked at her. "Does it change anything for you?" She held his gaze. "No," she said. "I made a decision. It was the right decision. I don't walk those back under social pressure." "Even from a senior partner who was here before you?" "Especially then," she said. The response had an edge in it that wasn't performative. It was the edge of someone who had been fighting this particular kind of resistance for long enough that the fighting had become a form of posture, upright, steady, not yielding. "The Korean partnership outcome won't hurt," Ethan said. "No," she agreed. "It won't." A pause. "Crane will adjust his position once the numbers are front of the board. He's strategic, not personal. He'll argue what the evidence supports and stop arguing what it doesn't." "That's almost a generous interpretation," Ethan said. "It's a functional one," she said. "I'm not interested in how people are. I'm interested in how they behave." He looked at her for a moment. "That must get lonely," he said. He said it before he could stop himself, and there was a fraction of a second in which he expected the composed exterior to close off, the way it sometimes did when something landed near the perimeter of what she kept private. It didn't close off. Instead, she looked at him with an expression that was, for a moment, without the arrangement, just a face, tired around the edges, something behind the eyes that registered the comment not as an intrusion, but as a recognition. "Yes," she said quietly. "It does." Neither of them said anything for a moment. The city moved outside the window, 42 floors below. "My wife used to say I was the only person she'd ever met who could read a room perfectly and still walk into the wall," Ethan said, "because I understood everyone's position in the room and just didn't always account for my own." Sophia looked at him. "She was right," he said. "She sounds like she was perceptive," Sophia said. "She was the most perceptive person I've ever known," he said. It came out without the careful control he usually applied to this particular subject, and it sat between them in the room without apology. "I'm sorry you lost her," Sophia said. Still direct, still without the performance of sympathy. Just the fact of it, stated to another person who had proven they could handle facts. "I'm sorry too," he said, every day. The meeting continued. There was work to get through. There was always work to get through. And they got through it in the focused, practical way they'd developed over these months. But something in the room had shifted, the way the air in a room shifted when a window was opened, not dramatically, but perceptibly. He gathered his materials at the end and stood up. "Ethan," she said. He turned. "The work you've done here in 3 months, it's already changed the company's capacity in ways that are going to compound."
Ons dead silent.
She said it matter-of-factly, and then she paused, and what came next was not matter-of-fact. "I want you to know that I see it, not as a CEO watching a good hire, as someone who understands what it costs to walk back in." He didn't have an immediate answer. "Thank you," he said finally, "for the job, and for not walking the decision back." She nodded. He left. He was in the elevator before he allowed himself to register what he was feeling, and what he was feeling was not simple enough to name. It was the compound thing, the gratitude and the unsteadiness and the forward motion that still felt, sometimes, like falling, and the knowledge that falling and moving forward were not always distinguishable from the inside. He took the elevator down, walked out into the afternoon, into a city that had been moving the whole time he was inside that building, carrying on its business without reference to his. He called Lily's school to confirm pickup time. He put one foot in front of the other, which was, in the end, the only method that had ever actually worked. Daniel Crane had been with Hartwell International for 19 years. He had joined the company when it was still called Hartwell and Associates, when the founder, Robert Hartwell, Sophia's father, was still coming in every day and running the operation with the particular hands-on intensity of someone who had built something from nothing and couldn't quite trust anyone else to hold it right. Crane had started as a junior partner, worked his way up through a decade of consistent, careful performance, and by the time Robert Hartwell's health began its slow decline and the question of succession became urgent, Daniel Crane had been the second most powerful person in the company for 4 years. He had expected to be asked. He had not been asked. Robert Hartwell had called his daughter home from London, where she'd been running the European operations, and announced her as CEO at a board meeting that Crane had attended and sat through with a face that gave away nothing and a chest full of something that had never fully resolved into acceptance. Sophia had been 28. She had walked into that board meeting with the composure of someone who had been preparing for it, and she had handled it well, handled everything well in the years since. But Crane's relationship with her had never been what it might have been if the succession had gone differently. He was not vindictive. Ethan had thought about this carefully, trying to be fair. Crane wasn't acting from spite. He was acting from the particular conviction of a man who believed, genuinely, that his judgment about the organization was superior, and that Sophia's choices needed monitoring because she was still, after 2 years of strong results, a young woman who had been handed something she hadn't fully earned. The conviction was wrong. But it wasn't malicious. It was the ordinary, insidious kind of bias that didn't know itself. Ethan understood it. Understanding it didn't make it easier to work around. The 6-month mark at Hartwell arrived without announcement on a Thursday in early autumn, and Ethan noted it the way he noted most things, quietly, without making ceremony of it. He had outlasted Daniel Crane's prediction. The partnerships were performing. His team had grown by 2 people. Una had been promoted to lead analyst, and the international communications function had moved from a supporting department to something that was beginning to look like a strategic center of gravity. He noted all of this, and then he went to pick up Lily from school and made spaghetti for dinner and helped with a geography worksheet about South America, and the 6-month mark passed into 7 without anyone raising a glass or making a speech, which was exactly how he preferred significant things. The trouble with becoming visible, he was learning, was that visibility attracted everything, not just the professional respect that came with demonstrated results, not just the grudging recalibration from people like Crane, who eventually had to adjust their position when the evidence became too clear to argue with. It attracted the other things too. The speculation, the scrutiny that didn't have a professional basis. He was aware by the 7-month mark that his working relationship with Sophia had become the most reliably analyzed aspect of his presence in the company. Not because anything had happened. Nothing had happened, and he was certain enough of his own internal accounting to know that for a fact, but because they worked closely and visibly, and in certain organizational cultures, 2 people who worked closely and were not obviously unfriendly toward each other were almost inevitably going to have a narrative attached to them. He addressed it once, directly, with Claire. "I know people are watching," he said. They were in his office, the door open, late morning. People are always watching, Claire said, without looking up from the document she was reviewing. The watching has a specific quality, he said. She looked up then. She considered him for a moment with the practical candor she brought to most things. You want my honest read? Yes. The people who know the work don't care, she said. The people who care about the story don't matter. She paused. The problem is the people in the middle who care about both and aren't sure which one to prioritize. What do you tell them? Nothing, she said. It's not my job to manage the interpretation. My job is to do good work and let that be the story. She picked up her document again. You should consider the same approach. I do consider it, he said. I'm also aware that it leaves a gap that other people fill. Yes, Claire said. That's the price of being visible. You used to be invisible, and invisible had its own costs. She looked at him over the top of her reading glasses, which she'd recently started wearing and which she treated with a mild irritation, as if they were a compromise she hadn't agreed to. There's no version of being a person in the world that doesn't cost something. He didn't have an argument against that. Sophia called him on a Saturday morning in October. He was at the kitchen table with Lily, who was deeply involved in a project that involved construction paper, scissors, and what appeared to be an attempt to recreate the solar system in 3 dimensions. The call came in at 9:15, which was early enough for a weekend that it registered before he'd fully processed the day. There's a problem, she said, without preamble, which was her style regardless of the hour. Tell me. The Meridian Group deal. He set his coffee down. The Meridian Group was a European investment consortium, German-led with Belgian and French partners, that had been in extended negotiations with Hartwell for a $120 million partnership in the infrastructure sector. The deal had been moving toward close for 2 months. Ethan's team had been supporting the communications architecture, and he had flagged, 3 weeks ago, a potential misalignment in how the risk-sharing language had been translated across the 3 language versions of the contract. The flag I raised on the risk language, he said. It's worse than flagged, she said. I just got off the phone with the consortium's lead counsel. The French legal team's version of the contract reads the risk-sharing clause in a way that is materially different from the German version. The German side signed assuming one interpretation. The French side signed assuming another. We are 48 hours from the formal closing date, and we have 2 parties who agreed to different things. Ethan was quiet for a moment, assembling the problem. What does the English master document say? He said. The English version is technically consistent with the German interpretation, Sophia said. But the French team is arguing that the French version has equal legal standing under the consortium's founding charter. Does it? A pause. Our lawyers say probably not, but probably is not a word I want to take into a $120 million closing. No, he agreed. Who negotiated the French version? The team we used before your department took over international communications coordination, she said. There was no blame in it, just the fact. Do you have the original French negotiation notes, the session records? Kwame is pulling them now. I need them in the next 2 hours, Ethan said, and I need direct access to both legal teams, not through intermediaries. Direct. I can arrange that. And Sophia, he paused. This is fixable. The language gap is real, but it's not insurmountable. The question is whether both parties want the deal to close more than they want to be right about the interpretation. A brief silence. Do you believe they do? The German side does, he said. The German lead, Mueller. I've been in 3 calls with him. He wants this deal. The French partner is harder to read. I'll know more once I see the session notes. He glanced at Lily, who had looked up from the solar system and was watching him with the patient attention of a child who had learned to distinguish between the calls that required quiet and the calls that required leaving the room. He held up one finger. Give me a minute. And she nodded and went back to Mars. I'll send everything through in the next 30 minutes, Sophia said. Are you home? Yes. I'll send a car for you if you need to come in. Let me look at the materials first, he said. I may be able to do the preliminary work from here. Okay. A pause. Thank you, Ethan. I'll call you when I've looked at the documents. He hung up and sat for a moment with the phone in his hand. Dad? Lily said. I know, he said. I have to do some work. The business people again? Different business people. Different problem. She looked at him with the evaluating expression she'd developed recently. A kind of practical assessment of situations that reminded him, sometimes with a physical jolt, of Dana. Is it a bad problem? It's a solvable problem, he said. Everything that's actually a problem is solvable. Things that can't be solved aren't problems. They're just facts you have to live with. She thought about this. That's interesting, she said, in a tone that meant she was filing it away. I'll be at the desk, he said. You okay here? I'm building the solar system, she said. I don't need supervision. He went to his office. The Meridian crisis took 11 days. Not because the linguistic gap was complicated. He had identified the precise point of divergence in the French translation within 2 hours of receiving the session notes. A single compound phrase in the risk-sharing clause that the original French negotiating team had rendered with a verb construction that carried a conditional implication in legal French that was absent in the German and English versions. The gap was real. The solution was technically straightforward. A supplementary protocol clarifying the shared interpretation, agreed to by all three parties, which would be appended to the closing documents. The 11 days were not about the language. They were about the people. Marcus Leblanc, the lead French legal representative, was a man who had built his professional identity around being the person who caught what other people missed. Being presented with a translation discrepancy that had existed in documents his team had produced was not, for him, primarily a technical problem to be corrected. It was a threat to his professional standing, and he handled it accordingly, first by disputing that the gap was material, then by arguing that the French interpretation was the intended one, and the German and English versions were the error, and finally, when both of those positions became untenable, by slowing the process with procedural demands that had the effect of making the correction as expensive in time and friction as possible. Ethan had encountered this before, in academic contexts. The specific dynamic of a highly intelligent person who had made an error in a public enough context that acknowledging it required them to dismantle something about their self-presentation. You couldn't approach it frontally. Frontal approaches just hardened the resistance. You had to give the person a way to move without appearing to retreat. He did it in a joint call on day 7. He had prepared for the call with more care than he showed, because preparation that showed was a different thing from preparation that worked. When the call opened, instead of returning to the discrepancy, he reframed the entire situation, addressing both legal teams at once as a sophisticated alignment challenge that had emerged from the complexity of trilateral documentation, something that reflected the ambition of the deal rather than a failure of any single party. He complimented the precision of the French legal construction on its own terms, identifying specifically what it accomplished within French legal framework. Then he proposed the supplementary protocol not as a correction, but as an enhancement, a clarifying document that would strengthen the deal against future interpretation disputes in any jurisdiction. Leblanc went quiet for about 40 seconds. Then he said, in very careful English, that this approach was sensible. On day 11, the protocol was signed. The closing went through. Sophia's message came at 6 in the evening. Done. Meridian Group is official. That was exceptional work. He sat with it for a moment, then typed, Leblanc is good. He just needed a way through that didn't cost him anything. Her response? You found it. That's the skill. He closed the laptop. Quote, the thing about a crisis successfully navigated was that it reset the narrative. Crane's whisper campaign about Ethan's stability had been quiet since the Korean partnership numbers hit the board report in month 4. The Meridian outcome was different. It was the kind of result that traveled, not just internally, but in the industry. 3 months later, Ethan was fielding calls from 2 other companies who had heard, through the network channels of the professional world, about a senior communications director who had unfrozen a $120 million deal with a linguistic bridge. He turned down both calls, politely, and reported them to Sophia. You didn't have to tell me, she said. You should know if your people are being approached, he said. She looked at him across the Friday meeting table. What did you tell them? That I was committed here, he said. That I wasn't available. Were you honest about that? The commitment? It was a direct question, the kind she asked without the social padding that most people would have wrapped around it. He'd come to expect this from her. The directness that didn't soften its edges because softening was a form of assumption about the other person's fragility. Yes, he said. I was honest. She nodded. She seemed satisfied with that. In the practical way, she was satisfied with facts that confirmed what she'd assumed. But something else had been building in those Friday meetings, accumulating the way things accumulated when 2 people spent enough honest time together. He was aware of it the way you were aware of something in your peripheral vision. You couldn't look directly at it without it moving, but it was there. Sophia had begun, gradually and in ways that were small enough to be individually unremarkable, to use the Friday meetings for things that were adjacent to work without being fully about work. A comment about a situation she'd handled during the week that had cost her something, not framed as complaint, but as observation, the way someone would share an observation with a person whose perspective they'd come to find useful. A question about how Lily was doing, asked in the specific way of someone who remembered previous answers and was tracking continuity. Once, only once, early in month 7, a mention of something personal, brief, and without elaboration, about a man she'd been engaged to before she came back to run the company. She'd said it in the context of a broader point she was making, and she didn't invite follow-up, and Ethan hadn't offered any. But he'd heard it. He heard most things. He had said to Leonard once that Dana had been the most perceptive person he'd ever known. That remained true, but he was beginning to revise his belief that perception was the rarest quality a person could have, because he was encountering it in Sophia with a frequency that was doing something to his previous certainty. The board meeting in November was the largest high-stakes event of Ethan's 8 months at the company. Hartwell International's annual board review involved 12 board members, the full senior executive team, and a formal presentation of the year's performance and strategic direction. For the first time in the company's history, the international communications function was presenting its own section, not a footnote in the partnership's report, but a standalone performance review with its own data and its own strategic case for continued investment. Ethan had been preparing for 6 weeks. He had not been sleeping adequately for the last 2 of them. He had not told Lily this, because she was 7 now, and she worried about him with the focused efficiency of a child who had learned early that worry was sometimes warranted, and there was no reason to give her additional material. He told her he was working on something important. "Like a test?" she said.
A bit like a test, he said.
"I'll quiz you," she offered. He'd laughed, genuinely, which was the kind of laugh that came out of nowhere and reminded him it still worked. "Thank you," he said. "I think I've got it." "People always say that before they fail," she said, with the serene confidence of someone who had learned this from observation. "You're 7, he said. "Almost 8, she said. The board meeting was on a Wednesday. He arrived at 43 early, which was the kind of preparation habit that professional pressure reinstated, and found Raymond and Una already in the conference room setting up materials. Una had been in the office until 11 the night before. He knew this because he'd been there until 11 himself, and she looked tired but precise, which was the state Ethan had come to recognize as her operating mode under pressure. "How do you feel?" Raymond asked him. "Ask me at noon," Ethan said. "It's a good presentation," Una said. She said it the way she said most things, as an evaluation, not a reassurance. "It is," he agreed. "The question is whether the board wants to hear it." Crane was in the room when Ethan arrived for the full session. He was positioned near the window, speaking quietly with 2 board members, older men, both from the financial side. And he acknowledged Ethan's entry with a brief, controlled nod that communicated nothing except the fact of acknowledgement. Ethan nodded back and went to his position at the table. Sophia opened the meeting. He watched her do it, the precise, measured confidence with which she moved through the opening, establishing the frame without apology or preamble. She was good at this. She had a quality in front of a room that was different from her quality one-on-one, but both were real. In front of a room, she was more formidable, which was the word he always ended up at when he tried to characterize what she was. Not in the way of someone performing authority, but in the way of someone who had been tested and had not moved. When it was his turn, he stood up. He presented for 22 minutes. He had prepared for 20 minutes. The extra 2 came from a question by a board member named Carson, a sharp, retired international banking veteran who asked about the Korean partnership framework in enough technical depth to indicate she had actually read the supporting materials, and Ethan's answer required real engagement, not summary. He gave it, watching her face for the signals of whether the depth was landing, and it was. Carson nodded once, sharply, which was the Carson equivalent, he would later learn, of standing applause. When he sat down, the room had the particular quality of a session in which the energy had shifted. Not dramatically. Board meetings didn't work that way. But the attention had changed quality, the way attention changed when people who were prepared to be skeptical encountered something that didn't give them a reason to stay skeptical. After the meeting, during the break before the afternoon session, Crane approached him. He had been expecting this. He had not been expecting what Crane said. "The Meridian Protocol, Nassim," Crane said. He had a coffee cup in one hand, and the expression of a man who is recalibrating and doing so carefully. "The linguistic bridge you constructed. I've been in international business development for 20 years. I've seen that problem kill deals. I haven't seen it solved that way." Ethan held his coffee and said nothing, because this was a moment that required listening, not response. "You're very good at what you do," Crane said. It cost him something to say it. Not a great deal, but something. The cost was visible in the slight stiffness of the delivery. "Thank you," Ethan said. Crane nodded. He started to turn away, then paused. "I may have had incorrect assumptions about the circumstance of your hire," he said. "I want to be direct about that." "I appreciate that," Ethan said. "It doesn't mean I'll stop watching," Crane said. "I watch everyone." "I know," Ethan said. "That's not unreasonable." Crane seemed faintly surprised by this response. He nodded again and moved away. Ethan exhaled through his nose and went to find a window. Sophia found him on the 43rd floor terrace 20 minutes later. It was cold. November, the kind of gray afternoon that stripped the last color out of the trees. And he was standing with his jacket on and his coffee cooling in his hand, looking at the city without particularly seeing it. She came and stood beside him, which was the Sophia way, not announcing her arrival or asking if she was intruding, just arriving and being there. "Crane spoke to you," she said. Not a question. "How do you know?" "Because he spoke to me first," she said. "He said he may have been incorrect about the circumstances of your hire. Coming from Crane, that's a comprehensive retraction." "He's not a bad person," Ethan said. Sophia was quiet for a moment. "No," she said finally. "He's not." She held her coffee in both hands. "He's a person who has very specific ideas about how organizations should work and who belongs in them, and the ideas are wrong in some areas that matter. But bad is a different category." "You've had to be very patient with him," Ethan said. "I've had to be patient with a lot of things," she said. She said it without self-pity, just as an honest statement about what the job required. "You get used to it, not comfortable with it, used to it." They stood in the cold for a moment. "The presentation was excellent," she said. "Carson asking about the Korea framework was not accidental. She reads everything, and she was testing whether you could hold the depth. She told me at the break that you were the most technically rigorous communications lead she'd encountered at board level." "She's an interesting person," Ethan said. The question she asked about translation drift in long-form partnerships. She was thinking about it from a risk management angle that most people don't reach. "Most people aren't Carson," Sophia said. The city moved below them. A plane crossed the sky at altitude, catching light from an angle the ground couldn't see. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "The man you were engaged to," he said. "You mentioned him once. You don't have to answer." She was quiet for a moment. He was aware that he might have overstepped, that the one mention had been an adjacency, not an invitation, and that Sophia's version of openness had specific boundaries. He was about to retract the question when she spoke. "His name was James," she said. "We were together for 4 years. I came back to run this company, and he had his own career in London, and we spent 8 months doing the long-distance thing, and then we didn't." She paused. "He wasn't wrong to end it. The honest version is that I had already made my choice, and the relationship was something I was trying to maintain alongside the choice rather than actually choosing it." She said this with the forensic precision she applied to most things, but underneath the precision there was something that was still not entirely settled. It wasn't that he left. It was that I had been, in some part of myself, managing my way toward a life that only had room for the work. "Do you regret it?" Ethan said. She considered this with actual care rather than a quick answer. "I regret that it happened the way it did," she said. "Not that it ended. The relationship was already something else by the time we acknowledged it was finished." A pause. "What I regret is what I understood afterward, that I'd spent 4 years with someone I cared about and had never once been fully present. I was always planning the next thing, always managing toward the next state." She looked at the city. "That was a choice I made without ever deciding to make it." He understood this. He understood it from the inside, from years of managing grief by managing everything around it, by being present in the technical sense and absent in the actual one. "I did the same thing in reverse," he said. I was so present in the grief that I was absent from everything else, including Lily in the ways that mattered. He paused. She told me last year that I used to do things. She was 6 years old. Sophia looked at him. What did you do with that? I took your job offer, he said. Something in her expression moved, the trace of a smile again, the same shadow he'd seen in the early weeks, brief and unperformed. But this time it stayed a beat longer before it went. They stood in the cold for another minute. I should go back in, she said. Afternoon session. I know, he said. She didn't move immediately. Ethan. Her voice had shifted, still even, still composed, but with something underneath it that was slightly different from the professional register.
I don't do this well, she said. The personal part of things. I'm aware that I don't. A pause. But I've been thinking that this... She paused again, and he had the unusual experience of watching Sophia Hartwell search for words. That what this is, between us, working together, I don't have clear language for it, and I'm not used to not having clear language. He looked at her. Neither do I, he said. I'm usually very precise about language. She met his eyes. We should probably pay attention to that, she said. Not as a suggestion to pursue it, not as a suggestion to avoid it, just as a thing they should both be honest about. Yes, he said. We probably should. She nodded. She set down her coffee cup on the terrace railing and went back inside. He stood in the cold for another moment, the city spread out below him in its ordinary Wednesday November way, doing its business without reference to what had just been said on a 43rd floor terrace by two people who were both very good at managing themselves and had just admitted, carefully and without drama, that something was there. He didn't know what to do with it yet. He wasn't sure she did either. He picked up her empty cup, habit, the muscle memory of someone who had cleaned this floor for 3 years, and then stopped and looked at it in his hand. And somewhere in there was something almost funny. And he let it be almost funny, and he went back inside. The thing about an admission that lives in the space between two people is that it doesn't disappear. You can't unsay it. You can ignore it, work around it, maintain professional behavior with the careful precision of two people who are both extremely good at managing themselves, and they did for several weeks after the terrace, conducting their Friday meetings and their cross-departmental work, and their ad hoc calls with exactly the same functional competence as before. But it was there. It occupied the room the way an unresolved chord occupied a piece of music. Not disruptive, not obvious, but present in a way that changed how everything around it sounded. Ethan noticed it in small things, the half-second longer that her eyes held his before moving on in a meeting. The specific quality of the silence at the end of their Friday sessions when the agenda was done and neither of them moved immediately. The way she asked about Lily, not as conversation filler, but with a genuine retention of detail that meant she was actually listening and actually remembering. He noticed these things, and then he worked very hard not to make anything of them, because making something of them required a kind of courage that he was still rebuilding, and he wasn't sure the reconstruction was complete enough yet to trust. He talked to Leonard about none of this. He talked to Leonard about work, the expanding scope of the department, a new multilateral partnership coming out of Southeast Asia that was going to require a communication framework, unlike anything the company had attempted before. Leonard, to his credit, did not pry. He had the patience of someone who believed that when Ethan was ready to say a thing, Ethan would say it, and not before. Lily, who had no such patience and had never pretended to, said it plainly at dinner on a Friday in late November. Is Sophia your girlfriend?
Ethan set his fork down. No, he said. Do you want her to be? Lily. I'm just asking, she said, in the reasonable tone of someone who considered the question entirely normal. She's my boss, he said. Lily considered this. Mrs. Patterson at school is Mr. Wheeler's boss and they're married, she said. That's a different situation. How? He didn't have an immediate answer, which Lily registered with the satisfaction of someone who had made a point. I like her, Lily said, returning to her dinner. She seems real. What does that mean? Real. Like she doesn't pretend, Lily said. Some adults always pretend everything is fine. She doesn't do that. She looked at him. You don't do that either. Anymore. He picked his fork back up. When did you meet her? He said. You've never met her. She called when you were in the hospital that time, Lily said. When you had the kidney stone. I answered because you were in the bathroom being sick. She talked to me for like 10 minutes until you came out. He had not known this. What did she say? He said. She asked me what grade I was in and what I was studying, and whether I thought math was useful in real life or just at school. Lily paused. I said it depends on the math. She said that was a very good answer. She shrugged. She seemed real. He sat with the information that Sophia Hartwell had spent 10 minutes talking to his 7-year-old daughter about the practical applications of mathematics while he was incapacitated with a kidney stone, and had apparently not mentioned it to him once in the weeks since. He filed that away. December arrived with the particular compressed energy of a month that carried too much in too little time. The company was finalizing the year-end reporting cycle, 3 partnership deals were in various stages of closing, and the Southeast Asia framework that Ethan had been developing since October was ready for its first real-world deployment, a multilateral meeting in the second week of the month involving partners from Vietnam, Singapore, and Japan. With a secondary American investor group whose presence added a layer of cross-cultural complexity that Ethan had built the entire framework around managing. He was also, by the second week of December, operating on approximately 5 hours of sleep a night and not telling anyone. He would have continued not telling anyone if Raymond hadn't walked into his office on a Tuesday morning, looked at him with the evaluating expression of someone who had worked closely with a person for 9 months and knew their baseline, and said, "You look terrible." "Thank you," Ethan said. "I mean it functionally," Raymond said. "You're going into the biggest deployment of a framework you've spent 3 months building, and you look like someone who hasn't slept in a week." "It's been 10 days," Ethan said. Raymond pulled a chair over and sat down, which meant he wasn't going to be brief. "What's going on?" Ethan considered deflecting. Then he considered that Raymond had been honest with him consistently for 9 months, and probably deserved the same in return. "December is a complicated month," he said. Raymond waited. "Dana died in December," Ethan said. 3 years ago, the 16th. He said it evenly, the way he said it when he had to say it to someone who needed to know. "It doesn't," he paused. "It doesn't flatten me the way it used to, but the month has a weight to it. I don't sleep well from about the 1st through maybe the 20th. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then, "Does Lily know that the date is coming?" "She knows her mother died in December," Ethan said. "She was 3. Her memory of Dana is mostly things I've told her in photographs." A pause. "We have a thing we do around the 16th, just us. We look at pictures. I tell her stories about her mother. She asks questions." He looked at the window. "It's good, actually. It's one of the better things we do. It's the lead-up that's hard." "Do you need time off?" Raymond said. "No, the work helps." He looked at Raymond. "This is not a conversation to have with anyone else on the team." "I know," Raymond said. "And not with Sophia," Ethan said. Raymond looked at him steadily. "Okay," he said, "but she's going to notice." "She notices everything," Ethan said. "I know." "So?" "So that's her choice to make," Ethan said, "whether to ask or not." Raymond nodded slowly and stood up. "The Vietnam framework draft," he said, returning to the practical surface of things. "Una flagged something in the honorific address structure. You should look at it before the prep call this afternoon." "I'll look at it before lunch," Ethan said. "Good." Raymond paused at the door. "Ethan, for what it's worth, the department is different because of you, in ways that will outlast whether you stay or go, whether any individual deal closes." He said it the way he said things that were true and that he decided deserved to be said out loud. "I thought you should know that." Ethan looked at him. "Thank you," he said. "Raymond, don't thank me, just sleep." Sophia asked on Thursday. "Not in the Friday meeting, 2 days early, in the hallway outside the 42nd floor kitchen at 11 in the morning, which was not a scheduled or formal moment, just a moment that happened because they both happened to be there at the same time in a corridor that was momentarily empty. "You haven't been sleeping," she said. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." "You haven't been sleeping." He thought about deflecting again, and then remembered that she had spent 10 minutes talking to his daughter about mathematics and had never mentioned it. "December is a hard month," he said. She looked at him. She already understood. He could see the understanding arrive in her expression, not as surprise but as recognition. "The anniversary," she said. "The 16th. She was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone who didn't know what to say, but the silence of someone who is choosing what to say with care. Do you want to not work the 16th? She said. I want to work, he said. The work is better than the alternative. Okay, she said. Just that. No follow-up, no well-meaning supplementary advice, no are you sure or let me know if that changes. Just acceptance of what he'd told her. He appreciated this more than he knew how to express. Lily told me she talked to you, he said. When I was sick. A brief pause. Something in Sophia's expression shifted. A contained version of being caught, though she'd done nothing wrong. She answered your phone, she said. I wasn't going to hang up on a 7-year-old. What did she say about the math? The trace of the smile, genuine, briefly visible, then settled into something less guarded than the usual composure. She said math was useful for some things, but that for the most important things in life you needed different skills. She paused. I asked her what skills. She said knowing how people felt. He stood in the hallway and felt something move through him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Not grief and not joy. Something adjacent to both, like the place on a map where two territories shared a border. She's something, he said. She's extraordinary, Sophia said. She has your precision and something else entirely her own. He looked at Sophia. I want to say something, he said. Okay. What I said on the terrace, we don't have to. No, he said. I do have to. I've been going around it for 3 weeks, and I'm not good at things I can't articulate, so let me articulate it. He paused, organizing the language, which was what he always did when something mattered enough that the wrong words would be a failure. I'm aware that something has changed between us from what it was when I started here. I'm aware that I'm not neutral about you in the way that I would need to be for this to be nothing, and I'm also aware that I don't know what to do with that, because the last time I was not neutral about a person, it was Donna, and I don't have a framework for what comes after that except the one I've been building as I go. Sophia was still. She had the quality, in moments of significance, of being completely present in them. Not performing presence, but actually being there in a way that meant she was receiving what was being said without filtering it immediately into a response. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I'm not suggesting we do anything differently. I'm tired of not saying the thing I know is true, because not saying true things is something I've been doing for 3 years, and I've come to think it's not actually a virtue. She was quiet for a moment. Do you know what I've been doing? She said. Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it that was less even. For 3 weeks, since the terrace, I've been making sure I was never the first one into a room where you were already there. Because I was afraid that if I walked in and you looked at me, I was going to lose the expression I was planning to have. She paused. I run a company. I negotiate $100 million deals. I've been managing my entrance into rooms because of your face. The hallway was empty. The building moved around them, indifferent and ordinary. What are we doing? He said. I don't know, she said. And for Sophia Hartwell, who always knew, the 3 words had a particular weight. I have a daughter, he said. I know. She's the center of my life. That doesn't change. I know that too, she said. I'm not asking you to change it. What are you asking? She looked at him steadily. I'm not asking anything yet, she said. I'm saying that I hear what you said, and I'm saying that I'm not neutral either, and I think we should both sit with that and not rush it and not bury it. A pause. And I think we should probably not have this conversation in the 42nd floor kitchen hallway. He looked around. There's nobody here. There's never nobody here, she said. This building breathes gossip. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Point taken. She straightened slightly. The Sophia recalibration, the way she gathered herself when she was moving from one register to another. The Southeast Asia prep call is at 2, she said. I know. Are you ready for it? Yes. She nodded. She started to move past him down the hallway, then stopped and turned back and said something she'd clearly decided to say before the moment escaped. The 16th. If you and Lily, if there's anything that would help, that day or around it, I'm not offering to fix anything. I know it's not something to fix. I'm just saying I'm available, if that means anything. He looked at her. It means something, he said. She nodded once and went down the hallway, and he stood in the kitchen doorway with his coffee that had gone cold and let himself stay in the moment rather than immediately moving out of it. The Southeast Asia multilateral went well. Not perfectly. Nothing complex ever went perfectly, and the American investor group had a representative who consistently addressed the Vietnamese partners through their interpreter rather than directly, which created a subtle but compounding dynamic of depersonalization that Ethan had to address twice in real time without stopping the meeting to explain why he was doing it. The second time, he did it with enough precision that even the American representative adjusted his approach for the last hour of the session, apparently without fully registering that he'd been redirected. Yuna caught it. She was sitting 2 seats down from him, taking notes with the focused intensity she brought to fieldwork, and when the meeting broke for the midpoint recess, she appeared beside him and said very quietly, "The redirect on Jenkins. The second one. The way you framed it as a technical note on documentation clarity. He thought you were correcting the Vietnamese team's communication style." "I know," Ethan said. "So he corrected his own behavior thinking he was helping yours," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That's the most elegant thing I've ever seen in an active negotiation context." "It was necessary," he said. "Elegant isn't the goal." "No," she said, "but it doesn't hurt." The deal framework was agreed in principle by the end of the day, pending formal documentation. The Vietnamese lead partner, a composed man named Nguyen, who had conducted the entire session with a quietness that Ethan had read correctly as depth rather than deference, found him afterward and spoke to him briefly in Vietnamese, saying something that translated approximately as, "You understood the room. Not everyone does." Ethan replied in kind. The exchange lasted 40 seconds and was the part of the day he would remember most clearly. The 16th fell on a Sunday. He had arranged the day the same way he always arranged it, without structure, without schedule, just him and Lily and the photo albums, and the day to move through at its own pace. They started in the morning with pancakes, because Dana had made pancakes on Sundays with a particular casual expertise, and Ethan had learned the recipe from memory and imperfect repetition, and he still got it wrong in small ways every time, which Lily had stopped commenting on and started accepting as the correct version. They sat at the kitchen table and looked at the albums for 2 hours. Lily asked questions she had asked before, and new ones that meant her understanding was growing. Not just of who Dana had been, but of what it meant to lose someone before you were old enough to hold the memory yourself. She asked how they had met. She asked whether Dana had been funny. She asked whether Dana would have liked the apartment. She would have complained about the kitchen, Ethan said. The cabinet placement. She had very specific opinions about kitchen design. What opinions? That the cabinet above the stove was placed by someone who had never actually cooked, he said. You have to reach across a hot burner to open it. Lily looked at the cabinet. She was right, she said. She usually was, he said. They sat with that for a moment. Do you miss her today more than other days? Lily asked. She asked it carefully, in the way she asked the careful questions, not wanting to cause pain but needing to understand. He thought about the honest answer. No, he said, not more. The missing is pretty constant. Today is just the day I let myself sit with it, instead of moving past it. Lily considered this. Is that better or worse? Better, he said. I think. It's better to look at the things that are hard instead of walking around them all the time. He paused. Your mom taught me that, actually. She was very direct about hard things. Like me, Lily said. Exactly like you, he said. She looked at a photograph. Dana at a beach somewhere, laughing at something outside the frame, her hair sideways in the wind. Lily studied it for a long moment. I'm glad you have pictures, she said. I can remember her face from pictures. I can't remember her voice. He hadn't expected that. The flatness of it, not sad, just factual, the way Lily stated most things, hit him in the specific way that Lily's observations sometimes hit him, arriving without warning at exactly the point. I can tell you about her voice, he said. I can tell you what it sounded like. Tell me, she said. So he did. He sat at the kitchen table with his daughter on the anniversary of the worst day of his life and told her about her mother's voice, the specific texture of it, the way it changed when she was thinking hard about something, the particular laugh that Lily had inherited and didn't know she'd inherited. He talked for a long time, and Lily listened with the total attention she gave to things that mattered, and outside the window the December day moved at its own pace, indifferent and ordinary. His phone buzzed once, mid-morning, a message from Sophia. It said only, thinking of you both today. He showed it to Lily. Lily read it and nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd already decided. She's real, she said again. He wrote back, "Thank you." Then after a moment, "It's a good day, actually." Her response came quickly, "I'm glad." He set the phone face down and went back to the albums. Wong. The conversation they needed to have happened 10 days later. Not at work, not in a hallway or a conference room or a Friday meeting. It happened on a Saturday afternoon in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. Neutral ground that was Sophia's suggestion, which Ethan had recognized as her being deliberate about the context, separating the personal from the professional in a way that was important to her. She was already there when he arrived, which was unusual. Sophia was typically the person who arrived exactly on time, not early, because arriving early was a form of accommodation, and she was careful about how she distributed those. That she was early said something. He sat down across from her. The coffee shop was ordinary, the kind of place that had been in the neighborhood for 20 years and showed it, worn edges and good coffee, and a noise level that provided privacy without requiring effort. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble. "I know," he said. "So have I." She looked at him. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I want to be clear about that up front. I'm not cautious because I'm not interested. I'm cautious because I've learned what happens when I treat something important like a problem I can manage my way through." She paused. "James was a problem I tried to manage. It didn't work." "I know," he said. "You told me. I'm telling you again because I need you to understand that the caution isn't about you." She held her coffee cup with both hands, a small gesture of self-steadying that he'd come to notice. "It's about the only pattern I have for this, and the pattern is bad." "My pattern isn't much better," he said. "I have Dana, and then 3 years of not having a pattern at all." He looked at the table. "I've thought about whether it's too soon, whether the grief is still, whether what I feel around you is clear, or whether it's complicated by the fact that you're the person who pulled me back into the world." She was quiet. "I don't think those things are separable," he said. "The gratitude and the other thing. I don't think I can offer you a version of this where those are cleanly separate." He looked at her. "That might be a problem. Or it might just be honest," she said. "Is honest enough?" She considered this seriously, the way she considered things that deserved it. "I think honest is the only version of this that has a chance of being real," she said. "So yes, honest is enough." He looked at her. "I'm not asking you to move fast," he said. "I have a daughter and a rebuilt career, and I need both of those to stay stable. I can't do anything that puts Lily's stability at risk." "I know," she said. "I wouldn't want you to." "And I'm still—" He paused. "Some days I'm still carrying something heavy. It doesn't knock me down the way it used to, but it's there." "I have my own heavy things," she said. "I'm not asking you to have put yours down." They sat with that. "So what are we saying?" he said. "I think we're saying that we both know what this is," she said, "and we're choosing not to pretend it's something simpler, and we're going to move slowly, because slow is what's real, and fast is what makes things break." She paused. "And we're going to be honest when it's hard, not managed, honest." "That's going to be uncomfortable," he said. "Yes," she said. "Probably often." "You're okay with that?" She looked at him with the expression that was, he'd come to understand, her version of certainty. Not warm, not soft, but completely present and without doubt. "I've been managing the discomfort away for 10 years, she said. "I'd like to try the other thing." He nodded. They drank their coffee. The afternoon moved around them, the ordinary city doing its ordinary Saturday business, and they sat in the worn coffee shop and didn't try to resolve anything further because there wasn't anything to resolve. There was only what there was, named now, and held without urgency, which was the only way honest things could be held if you wanted them to survive. "She really said that?" he said after a while. "About math and real skills?" "Word for word," Sophia said. He shook his head. "She's 7. Almost 8, I think." He looked at Sophia across the table. "She told me you seemed real," he said. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Something in her expression, the arrangement, the careful composure, all of it, moved aside for just a beat and showed something underneath it that was neither the CEO nor the composed exterior, but just a person who had heard something that mattered. "That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in years," she said. Quietly, without drama, just the fact of it. "I thought you should know," he said. Outside, December moved toward its end. 3 years since the worst day. 9 months since the night he'd walked into a conference room with a mop and 11 languages and chosen, without fully understanding why, to stop being invisible. He was not the man who had stood in that hallway with his cart, watching through the glass wall at a life he'd put somewhere out of reach. He was not yet whatever came next. He was somewhere in between, which was uncomfortable and unresolved and entirely, stubbornly alive. He finished his coffee. "I should pick up Lily by 4, he said. "I know," she said. "Next Friday," he said. "The meeting." "Yes," she said. "The meeting." They gathered their coats in the ordinary way of two people preparing to go back into their lives, and went out into the December afternoon, not together and not apart, on either side of a door that was open and neither of them had stepped through yet, but that neither of them was pretending wasn't there. It was enough. For now, it was enough. January arrived the way January always did, without ceremony, without the kindness of a gradual transition, just the hard turn of the calendar and the specific cold that came after the holidays, when the decorations were down and the ordinary shape of life reasserted itself without decoration. Ethan noticed, in those first weeks of the new year, that he was waking up differently. Not better, necessarily. He was still up before 6 most mornings, still moved through the pre-dawn apartment with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing it alone for years. But there was a quality to the waking that had changed. He lay there in the dark for a moment before getting up, and the moment didn't fill immediately with the low-grade dread that had characterized most of his mornings for 3 years. That first conscious thought awareness of everything that was absent, everything that had to be carried, the weight that arrived before he'd even swung his feet to the floor. The weight was still there. He wasn't going to pretend it wasn't. But it had shifted in the way that weight shifted when you'd been carrying something long enough that your body had adjusted to it. Not lighter, exactly, but differently distributed. Something you carried with you rather than something carrying you. He thought about this while he made coffee, and then Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway with her hair still sideways from sleep and her stuffed rabbit under one arm. And the thought dissolved the way thoughts dissolved when a 7-year-old who was almost 8 walked into the room and required your actual attention. "It's cold," she announced. "It's January," he said. "They're the same thing," she said, and climbed onto her kitchen chair with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this in the same chair since she was 4. He put the oatmeal on and watched her pull the rabbit into her lap and begin a quiet, one-sided conversation with it about the injustice of January, and he thought, this is what survived. This right here. The ordinary Tuesday morning with the sideways hair and the rabbit and the complaint about the cold. 3 years of trying to keep this intact while everything else was falling, and it was intact. She was intact. She was, in fact, more than intact. She was a person, a specific and particular person with opinions about math and an instinct for recognizing when adults were real, and a laugh that came from her mother and a directness that was her own, and she was sitting in his kitchen on a January morning talking to a stuffed rabbit. He had not destroyed this. That mattered. He put the oatmeal in front of her and she looked up from the rabbit and said, without transition, "Is Sophia coming to my school play?" He blinked. "What?" "We're doing a play in February," she said. "About explorers. I'm Amelia Earhart. Mrs. Kim said we could invite family." "I'll be there," he said. "I know you'll be there," she said, with the patience of someone addressing a point that had never been in question. "I'm asking about Sophia." He sat down across from her. "Why would Sophia come to your school play?" Lily looked at him with the expression she used when she felt a question was not as complicated as the asker was making it. "Because she knows me," she said, "and she seems like she'd want to." "You've talked to her once," he said, "on the phone." "We've talked more than that," Lily said. He stopped. "What?" "She calls sometimes," Lily said, eating her oatmeal with the systematic efficiency she brought to all meals. "When you're in the shower or picking up groceries, we talk." Ethan sat with this information for a moment. "Since when?" he said. "Since like October," she said. "She asked me once if I'd started the new math unit, and I told her about fractions, and she said fractions were actually useful because of cooking, and I said I didn't really cook, and she said she'd teach me if I wanted." She looked up. "Can she? Teach me?" He stared at his daughter. "You two have been having regular phone conversations," he said, "for 3 months." "Not regular," Lily said. "Just sometimes, maybe once a week." She registered his expression. "Was that wrong?" She always asked if you were home first to make sure you knew she was calling. She told you to check if I was home? She said she didn't want to call behind your back, Lily said. She said that wasn't the kind of person she wanted to be. She paused. I told her you were usually in the shower at that time. She said that was not the point. He sat in the January morning in his kitchen and processed the image of Sophia Hartwell, CEO, woman who ran boardrooms, person who negotiated with the precision of a surgeon, calling his daughter weekly to discuss fractions and cooking and apparently managing the ethics of those calls with the same directness she brought to everything else. She wants to teach you to cook, he said. She said she wasn't very good at it, Lily said, but she was learning. She said it was better to learn something with someone than to learn it alone. She shrugged, in the way she shrugged when adult behavior confirmed something she'd already understood. So can she? I'll talk to her, he said. Okay, Lily said, and went back to her oatmeal with the serenity of someone who had raised the issue, received an appropriate response, and was done with it. He talked to Sophia on Friday, not in the meeting, before it, in the 10 minutes before Marcus appeared to say the full team was ready, when it was just the two of them in the small conference room with the round table and the morning light coming in at a low January angle. October, he said. She looked at him. She told you. She wants to know if you're coming to the school play. Sophia was quiet for a moment. He watched her expression. The slight tension of someone uncertain how something is going to land. It was, he realized, the same expression she'd had in the coffee shop when Lily's comment had moved through the composure and found the person underneath. I should have told you, she said. She said you asked if I was home, so you weren't hiding it. I wasn't hiding it, she said. She paused. I genuinely didn't know how to bring it up. Every time I thought about saying it, I couldn't find the right framing, which is embarrassing given what I do for a living. You're better with corporate language than personal language, he said. Yes, she said. Significantly. He looked at her. How did it start? The kidney stone call, she said. She answered your phone, and I thought I was just going to leave a message, but she started talking and A pause. She's very easy to talk to. She doesn't perform for adults. She just talks. Something in her face had softened slightly. I called back the following week to ask how you were recovering, and she answered again, and we talked for 20 minutes about the solar system. She met his eyes. I should have told you immediately. I know. Why didn't you? She held his gaze. Because it mattered to me, she said, and I didn't know yet what you'd do with it. Whether you'd... She stopped. Whether I'd pull back, he said. Yes. He thought about this honestly. Whether 3 months ago he would have. Whether the knowledge that Sophia had formed a genuine connection with Lily, independent of him, real enough that his daughter had absorbed it into her weekly routine without drama, would have frightened him into distance. He thought it might have. The school play is February 14th, he said. She blinked. That's Valentine's Day. Mrs. Kim has a sense of humor, he said. Lily is playing Amelia Earhart. A beat. Then something happened in Sophia's expression that he had seen only a handful of times. The full, unguarded version of the smile, not the trace or the shadow, but the actual thing. It arrived and stayed. I'll be there, she said. She'll want you in the front row, he said. Then I'll sit in the front row, she said. Marcus knocked and opened the door. Team's ready. They went into the meeting. The first quarter of the new year moved with a momentum that felt, for the first time in longer than Ethan could clearly account for, like forward motion rather than managed stasis. The Southeast Asia partnerships were formalizing. The framework Ethan's team had built was being adapted by 2 other departments as a model for their own international engagement, not because anyone had mandated it, but because it worked visibly and people had noticed. Una was presenting at an industry conference in March, the first time someone from the Hartwell Communications team had been invited to speak externally in 4 years. Raymond had started mentoring a junior analyst from the legal department who wanted to understand the cross-cultural dimensions of contract language. The department had become, without anyone announcing it, a place where people wanted to work. Ethan noticed this the way he noticed most things, by its effects rather than its announcement. The small signals, the analyst from legal who found reasons to drop by, the partnerships director who started CCing Ethan on correspondence that she hadn't previously thought to include. The quality of attention in his team's meetings, The way Una and Raymond had begun to push back on his framing when they thought it was wrong, which was the truest indicator he knew of a healthy working environment. People who trusted the room enough to disagree in it. He had built this. Not alone. Raymond and Claire and Una had built it with him, and Sophia had created the conditions by making the hire and defending it. But he had been part of building something real. He thought about this sometimes, and then tried not to think about it too much, because the part of him that had spent 3 years managing his own expectations downward was still a little suspicious of satisfaction. Leonard called in late January, and Ethan told him about the department, the partnerships, the conference invitation for Una. Leonard listened, and then he said, "You sound different." "Different how?" "Like yourself," Leonard said. "The version of yourself I knew 10 years ago, before, He stopped himself. "Just like yourself." Ethan didn't have an immediate answer. "It's not the same," he said finally. "I'm not who I was at 28. "No," Leonard said. "You're better." The 28-year-old was brilliant and had no idea what things cost. A pause. "The current version knows what things cost and does them anyway. That's a different kind of person." He held that for a while after the call ended, knowing what things cost and doing them anyway. He turned that over, the way he turned over language that he thought was trying to say something true. Son. Crane stopped by his office on a Thursday morning in February, which had never happened before. He knocked, which meant he was managing the interaction consciously, and appeared in the doorway with the expression of a man who had decided something and was going through with it. "Do you have a few minutes?" Crane said. "Yes," Ethan said. Crane sat down in the chair across the desk and placed his hands flat on his knees, which was a body language tell Ethan had noticed before, the gesture of someone who was grounding themselves before saying something effortful. "I have a situation," Crane said. "In the Milan office. There's a partnership we've been building with an Italian infrastructure group. 18 months of development, substantial commitment from both sides. The regional director has been managing communications, but the Italian team has raised concerns about tone." He paused. "Specifically, they feel the recent correspondence has been, their word was freddo, cold. In Italian professional culture, warmth in written correspondence is not decorative," Ethan said. "It functions as a relational signal. Removing it reads as a change in commitment, not just a change in style." "Yes," Crane said. "That's essentially what they communicated, though it took 3 calls to understand what they were actually saying." "They wouldn't say it directly," Ethan said. "That would be impolite. They'd keep raising tone concerns until someone understood the actual issue." Crane nodded slowly. "Can you fix it?" "I can fix the correspondence and build a short framework for the regional director," Ethan said. "The relationship isn't damaged if we address it in the next 2 weeks. After that, it starts to harden." 2 weeks? Crane said. "I'll need the correspondence history and direct access to the Italian counterpart for 1 call. You'll have both by end of day," Crane said. He stood up and then did the thing he'd done once before. Stopped at the door, turned back, said the effortful thing. "I want to be direct with you about something." "Okay," Ethan said. "I was wrong about you," Crane said. "Not partially wrong. Wrong in the way that came from assumptions I'd made before I had any actual information." He said it with the stiffness of a man who was not practiced at this, but had decided it needed to be done properly. "That affected how I treated you in your first months here, and I'm aware that it cost you something, not just professionally, personally. The things that circulated about your fitness for the role. I didn't start those, but I didn't stop them either. I could have." The office was quiet. "I know," Ethan said. "I wanted to say it directly," Crane said. "Not because it changes anything, just because it's what honest people do." Ethan looked at him. "It does change something," he said. "Maybe not the history, but it changes now." Crane nodded. He left without further ceremony, which was the correct way to leave after saying something like that. Not waiting for more absolution than had been offered. Not retreating into small talk to soften the weight of the admission. Just saying it and going. Ethan sat for a moment in the quiet. He thought about the word Crane had used without knowing he was using it. What honest people do. He had said something similar to Sophia in December. She had said it back to him a different way. It was becoming, without planning, the thing their lives were organized around. Not comfort, not ease, not the managed version of things that kept the surfaces smooth. Just honesty, the practice of it daily, imperfect, sometimes uncomfortable, usually worth it. He pulled up the Milan correspondence file when it arrived at 3 in the afternoon and went to work. February 14th was a Tuesday. Lily was ready 45 minutes before they needed to leave, which had never happened before in the history of getting Lily ready for anything. She was wearing the brown leather jacket that served as her Amelia Earhart costume, a thrift store find that Mrs. Kim had sourced and that Lily had been wearing around the apartment for 2 weeks in preparation. And her hair was pulled back in the style that her teacher had demonstrated, and she was sitting on the couch with her hands in her lap with the specific stillness of a person who was operating on pure performance adrenaline and containing it through force of will. "You look good," Ethan said. "I know," she said, without vanity, just assessment. "Are you nervous?" "A little," she said, "but the good kind." "There's a good kind?" "Yes," she said. "Mrs. Kim says nerves mean you care. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be nervous." She paused. "I think that's true. I don't get nervous about things that don't matter." He sat down beside her on the couch. "Your mom would have loved this," he said. Lily turned and looked at him directly. "Tell me something she would have said, right now, if she were here." He thought about Dana, about the specific Donna who would have been sitting in this living room watching her daughter in a thrift store leather jacket prepare to play a pilot. The Dana who had strong opinions about cabinet placement and who laughed at things that were actually funny rather than things that were supposed to be funny, and she would have taken about 40 photographs already, he said, and she would have said that you inherited the serious face from her and the stubbornness from me. Lily smiled. Small, private, the smile for things that were both happy and sad at the same time. "Am I stubborn?" "Catastrophically," he said. "Good," she said. The doorbell rang. Lily was off the couch before Ethan fully registered it, across the living room and pulling the door open with the directness of a child who had been expecting this and was not going to pretend otherwise. Sophia was in the hallway. She was wearing a coat he hadn't seen before, dark green, and she was holding something. A small paper bag, the kind from a bakery. "I brought something for afterward," she said. "For after the show. Celebration supplies." Lily looked at the bag. "What kind?" "Croissants," Sophia said. "The good ones. From the place on Mercer Street." "I've never had those," Lily said. "They're extraordinary," Sophia said. "You deserve extraordinary things tonight." She looked at Lily properly, taking in the jacket, the hair, the careful stillness of opening night energy. "You look exactly right," she said. "That's what I said," Lily told Ethan. "She did," he confirmed. Sophia looked at him over Lily's head. Something passed between them. Not words, not even a full expression, just a beat of mutual acknowledgement that contained everything the months had accumulated and didn't need to say any of it out loud. "We should go," Lily said. "We shouldn't be late." "Amelia Earhart was never late," Sophia said. Lily looked at her. "How do you know?" "I don't," Sophia said. "I made that up. It sounded right." Lily considered this. "I think she probably wasn't," she said. "She seemed like a person who was on time." She took both of their hands, one in each of hers, the move of a child who had decided something and was not going to make a production of it, and pulled them toward the door. They went. Bob. The school gymnasium had been transformed in the way school gymnasiums were always transformed for events like this. Folding chairs in uneven rows, a backdrop painted by the art class depicting clouds and a horizon line, a hand-lettered banner that said, "Fearless Explorers," in colors that had clearly been chosen by committee. It smelled like floor polish and auditorium heat, and the particular energy of 47 children who had been told to wait quietly and were managing this with varying degrees of success. Sophia sat in the front row. She sat between Ethan and a father named Marcus, whose daughter was playing Sacagawea, and she held the paper program with the same focused attention she brought to meeting documents. And when the lights dimmed and the music started, a recording of something vaguely adventurous from the school's audio library, she was completely present in the way that she was completely present when things mattered. Lily came on in the third scene. She walked onto the stage with her hands in the pockets of the leather jacket and her chin slightly up, and she delivered her lines about navigation and sky and the irrelevance of what other people believed was possible in a voice that was clear and unhurried and entirely her own. She was not performing confidence. She had it. Ethan watched his daughter and felt the compound thing again. The grief and the gratitude layered over each other so thoroughly they were no longer separable. The awareness that Dana wasn't here for this running alongside the awareness that he was, that he had made it to this folding chair in this gymnasium in this life, and that the person beside him had in some fundamental way been part of how. He didn't try to resolve those things into a single feeling. He had stopped trying to do that. He let them both be true. When Lily's scene ended and she walked off stage, she turned at the edge of the curtain, just for a second, just long enough, and looked directly at the front row. Not at Ethan, at both of them. Then she was gone into the wings. Beside him, Sophia exhaled slowly. "She looked at us," Sophia said very quietly. "Yes," he said. A pause. "Both of us," she said. "I know." She didn't say anything else. She looked at the stage where the next scene was beginning, and her jaw was set in the particular way it got set when she was managing something internal. And after a moment, she reached into the space between their chairs, and her hand found his and stayed there. Neither of them made anything of it. It just was. They ate the croissants at the kitchen table at 9 o'clock, after Lily had changed out of the costume and performed a comprehensive debrief of every moment of the production and rated her own performance as a 7 out of 10 because she had stumbled slightly on one word in the second speech, and she did not give herself 10 out of 10 for stumbles. 7 is generous, Sophia said. Lily looked at her sharply. For a stumble, Sophia said. If I stumble in a presentation, I give myself a 5, maximum. You have to account for the mistake honestly, or the rating means nothing. Lily considered this with great seriousness. So I should give myself a 6? What do you think you deserved on everything except the stumble? 9, Lily said. Then average them, Sophia said. 9 plus 5 divided by 2 is 7. Your instinct was mathematically correct. Lily looked delighted. I did the math without doing the math. That's what good instincts are, Sophia said. Calculations you've already run. Ethan ate his croissant and watched his daughter and Sophia work through the arithmetic of self-assessment with the focused pleasure of two people who had found, in each other, a matching frequency. He thought about what Leonard had said, knowing what things cost and doing them anyway. He thought about a Wednesday night and a conference room with flickering lights and 18 people talking past each other in 4 languages, and a man with a mop handle who had stood at the threshold and made a choice that he hadn't fully understood at the time. He had thought, for a long time, that the choice had been about the deal, about the $300 million, or the professional reflex, or even the obscure feeling that something useful was being wasted. But sitting at this table now, watching Lily lick croissant flakes off her fingers, while Sophia recalculated the performance rating with the precision of someone who took a 7-year-old's self-evaluation seriously, he understood that the choice hadn't been about the deal at all. It had been about walking back through the door. That was the thing he'd been avoiding. Not the work, not the exposure, not the professional risk of being seen and potentially failing. The door itself. The passage from the managed smaller life back into a life that had full dimensions, that could hurt as well as feel good, that required him to be present for more than just Lily's breakfasts and school pickups, that required him to be a person in the world again, with all the cost and variability that entailed. He had stood at that threshold, and he had walked through it, not heroically, not with full understanding, but stumbling and imperfect and afraid in the specific quiet way that fear lived in him. And the world on the other side had not been the catastrophe he'd been half expecting for 3 years. It had been this, a kitchen table, croissants from Mercer Street, a daughter who averaged her own ratings, and a woman who had been managing her entrance into rooms because of his face, and a life that was not what it had been, and was not what he'd planned, and was genuinely, stubbornly, inconveniently worth living. Dad, Lily said. Yeah? You're doing the different thinking again. I know, he said. Is it the good kind? He looked at his daughter. He looked at Sophia, who was watching him with the expression that was the full version, not composed, not managed, just present and real and there. Yes, he said, the good kind. Lily accepted this and finished her croissant. And Later, after Lily was in bed, after Sophia had said goodnight in the doorway with the quiet ease of someone who was beginning to know how to occupy the space without filling it too much, Ethan sat in his home office in the dark and did something he hadn't done in a long time. He thought about Dana deliberately, not the December grief, not the anniversary wait. Just Dana, the actual person, brought forward into the present moment and set beside the present moment to see how they looked together. He thought about what she would have made of this year. The conference room, the job offer sitting on the kitchen table for 4 days, the Korean partnership and the Meridian deal, and Daniel Crane's recalibration, and a front row seat at a school play. He thought about what she would have made of Sophia, a woman who was precise and demanding, and had strong opinions about relational standing in corporate communication, and had spent 3 months talking to Lily about fractions, and had sat in the front row and let her hand find his in the dark, and had been, by Lily's accounting, real. He thought Dana would have liked her. He thought she would have found the situation, which was unlikely and complicated and not what anyone would have planned, fitting, because Dana had always believed that the things that actually mattered were the ones that couldn't have been anticipated. That life's job was not to deliver what you'd mapped out, but to bring you to the things you hadn't known to look for, and your job was to recognize them when they arrived. He had been very bad at that job for 3 years. He was trying to be better at it. He thought about something Sophia had said in the coffee shop in December, that she'd spent years with someone she cared about and had never once been fully present, always planning the next thing, always managing toward the next state. He had done the same thing in reverse, so present in the loss that he'd been absent from the living. Grief and work, the twin escapes, each one legitimate enough that you couldn't be criticized for choosing them. He had chosen both and called the combination a life, and persuaded himself for 3 years that it was enough. And Lily had sat in the back seat of a car at age 6 and told him the truth in 7 words. The truth was not comfortable. The truth was that hiding was not grieving, and silence was not peace, and a smaller life was not a safer one. It was just smaller. And the cost of smallness was not paid by you alone. It was paid by the people around you who needed you to be large enough to hold them. Lily had needed him to be large enough to hold her. He had been trying. He was still trying. He thought, sitting in the dark office, that he was getting better at it. He opened his laptop, not to work, just to write, the way he used to write when he was processing something too large for thought alone. He opened a document and put a cursor on a blank page and sat with it for a moment. Then he typed a single line. The goal was never the deal. He looked at it. The goal had been the door, the return, the choice, made in a corridor outside a conference room with a mop handle in his hands and 11 languages in his head, to stop being invisible. Visibility was not comfortable. He had learned this thoroughly. Visibility meant Crane and the whispers and the scrutiny and the Friday meetings where things got said that had consequences. It meant standing in a front row and feeling everything that happened on stage. It meant a kitchen table and a 7-year-old's accounting and a woman who called his daughter about fractions because she had found, in that conversation, something she hadn't expected and hadn't known she was looking for. Visibility meant being findable, by the good things and the hard things both. He had spent 3 years making himself unfindable and calling it protection. He understood now that it was not protection. It was preemptive surrender, a way of ensuring that nothing more could be taken by ensuring there was nothing more to take. Lily had not deserved a father who had preemptively surrendered. Dana, the Dana he carried, the specific and particular person who had driven a hard bargain with reality and refused most of its comfortable fictions, would not have endorsed it either. He closed the laptop. The apartment was quiet around him. The specific quiet of a home where someone was sleeping and the sleeping was safe, and the doors were locked and the morning would come with its oatmeal and its sideways hair and its questions about hedgehogs and fractions and whether Sophia was coming to the next thing. He was not finished. He would not arrive, in any clean final sense, at a place where the grief was done and the uncertainty was resolved and the life was ordered and complete. That was not the way it worked, and he had stopped expecting it to work that way. There would be Decembers. There would be mornings when the wait was worse than others. There would be moments, probably, when the old reflex toward smallness reasserted itself, and he would have to choose again, and the choosing would not get easier just because he'd done it before. But there would also be this, the table and the croissants and the rating system and the hand in the dark. The work that was genuinely worth doing, with people who were genuinely worth doing it with. The daughter who had never stopped seeing him clearly, not even during the years when clarity was not what he was offering, and who had waited with the patient ferocity of someone who understood, at 6 years old, that her father was still in there somewhere and that eventually he would find his way back. He had found his way back. Not to the life he'd had. That life was gone, and he had made some peace with its goneness, and he was continuing to make peace with it in the ongoing way that was the only way peace got made with real losses. But back to living. Back to being a person who occupied his life fully rather than managed it from a careful distance. The man who had cleaned the floors of this building for 2 years and 7 months, the man who had moved through those hallways in the specific invisibility of someone who had decided that being seen was more dangerous than being overlooked. That man had walked into a room on a Wednesday night and interrupted a $300 million negotiation in a maintenance uniform and 11 languages, and the world had not ended. It had in fact begun. That was the thing about the door. You stood at the threshold and you looked at what was on the other side and you felt everything that could go wrong. Every version of the story where you stepped through and lost something, and the fear was real, and the risk was real, and none of that was the reason to stay. The reason to go through was simpler than courage. It was just this. The life you were protecting by staying out was not the life you actually wanted. It was the life that had survived the worst thing, carefully preserved in its post-disaster form, functional and incomplete. The life worth living was on the other side of the door. You had to walk through it. He sat in the dark for another minute. Then he turned off the desk lamp and went to bed. And he slept. Not easily, not without the ordinary restlessness of a mind that still carried more than its share, but fully. The way a person slept who had, for the first time in a long time, know where they were hiding from. In the morning there would be oatmeal, and a school run, and a message from Sophia about the Milan correspondence, and a call with Yuna about the March conference, and the next thing, and the next thing after that, and the ordinary forward motion of a life lived out in the open. It was enough. It was, in every way that mattered, more than enough.